Supremacy Games. Chapter 1051-1075. 1051. A perverted scene. Felix remained unresponsive, he merely kept tracing her with his eyes as she walked around him. He would be lying if he said that he had anticipated this much. He was truly caught off guard by her hidden prowess. "It's okay, you stay silent as much as you want." Tangle Seeker got closer to his face and gave him a quick peck in his forehead with a mischievous look. "My mom has told me to spend some time humiliating you properly until your mind cracks. So, we will be spending some time here, but don't worry, time runs 100 times faster in here." Tangle Seeker whispered in his ear. "I am sorry to interrupt your villainous speech, but is Kumiho your mom?" Felix asked with a look of intrigue. Tangle Seeker's eyelids twitched at his casualness, like his life wasn't on the line. Still, she wanted to avoid appearing affected by him, making her answer with a hint of pride in her tone, "Yes, she is. Stop being disrespectful and call her Miss Universe." "Miss Universe?" Felix closed his mouth shut, trying his best to hold out his laughter. "You f***ing prick, you dare laugh at my mother." Tangle Seeker kicked Felix in the stomach to vent her anger after seeing him disrespect her mother twice. Arg! Although it looked like a normal kick, Felix couldn't help but groan in pain. "I have increased your pain sensors here to the limit." Tangle Seeker placed her heel on his crotch as she threatened, "So, stop being disrespectful and let me torture you in peace. Otherwise..." "Arg! That's where I draw the line." Felix snapped his eyes open in anger after his innocent little general was drawn into this mess. "Line? Haha. What line? You don't have a line in my world, eh?" Before Tangle Seeker could finish her ridicule, she was left shocked speechless at the sight of Felix breaking her chains like they were made out of twigs. "You how?" Slap. Felix slapped her in the face the moment he stood up, not allowing her to even express her shock. Felix knew that Asna wouldn't hesitate to watch his memories and see what kind of things he was doing with Tangle Seeker in this world. "*TCH, you are trying to create trouble for me with my girl." Upon hearing so, Tangle Seeker got even more confused and bewildered by the whole situation, feeling like she was in a dream. This was supposed to be her world and Felix was nothing but a slave in it with absolutely no control whatsoever. "You freak! What did you do?" Tangle Seeker teleported a couple of meters away from him, feeling a bit spooked. "Me? Nothing." Felix shrugged his shoulders carelessly, "I won't lie, your mental prowess did catch me off guard, but it's still not enough to overwhelm me." "That's impossible. I can even enslave royal dragons in mid-empyrean rank." Tangle Seeker called bullsh*t on him instantly, not daring to believe his words. Who could blame her? She was the daughter of Kumiho, the charm primogenitor. Sure, she pulled the short stick in terms of bloodline purity, making her extremely weaker than what was expected of the biological children of primogenitors. But still, she was leagues above the rest of spirit foxes and even many hive night guards. "It's impossible for a human like you to possess mental prowess rivaling mine." "You are right." Felix smiled, "I shouldn't rival your mental prowess the way things are. But just like you, I also have a card in my sleeve." The moment he finished speaking, Felix snapped his finger, causing the entire world to collapse, which resulted in them getting kicked out immediately. Cough cough. Tangle Seeker suffered from a nasty backlash, making her cough out large quantity of blood. "Hey? Landlord has already broken through her mental attack." Vinali wondered in surprise after seeing Tangle Seeker's horrible appearance compared to Felix. Everything happened so fast, the viewers were still reacting to the fact that Felix had gotten caught in a mental attack. This shocked no one more than Kumiho. Her charming smile was stiffened the moment she saw her daughter coughing blood. "It can't be." She was just about to ridicule Lady Sphinx before her entire plan fell apart akin to a house of cards. Manananggal, Wendigo, and Saurus were in the same boat as her, their hopes were just about to rise up about the fact of Felix getting killed before getting crushed yet again. Did he drink a potion to boost his mental defenses or something? Erebus and the others were also left bewildered. They honestly assumed that Felix was done for, and he would be forced to either surrender or go through the worst possible experience in his life. After all, this was Kumiho's biological daughter. It must be that golden electricity on his body. Siren asked Thor, "Did you teach him a new ability to enhance his mental defenses?" "Nope," Thor answered. Thor didn't lie, but Siren was still correct in her assumption. The golden electricity coursing underneath Felix's void suit had played a considerable role in his ability to break apart Tangle Seeker's mental attack. The golden lightning was nothing but normal electricity with a sacred attribute. This attribute was from the royal yellow gemstone on Felix's chest and was the second gemstone to have a mental affecting effect. The orange royal gemstone helped increase Felix's mental attacks while the yellow handled his defenses. The instant Felix realized that something was wrong with Tangle Seeker, he covered his entire skin with golden electricity right before he was taken inside her hallucination world. It boosted his mental defenses just enough to be on equal terms to her. "I really never expected to use it this early in my climb." Felix mew-mewed as he transformed his hair into 9 tentacles. When Tangle Seeker saw them, she felt chills course on her spine as it made Felix appear even more devilish. "I need to run away to recover." Sadly, she was just too dangerously close to Felix, making her get caught by his tentacles in the blink of an eye. "Let me go, you bastard!" she cursed while struggling to escape from the tentacles' clutches. Arg! Alas, the more she struggled, the harder those tentacles tightened their grasp on her. "So, you wanted to humiliate me, right?" Felix smiled coldly while controlling his tentacles to open her limbs apart, making her seem like she was in a cross. She had already lost her fox transformation when she suffered from the backlash, returning her Humaniad bewitching beauty. With her slightly ripped apart clothes and flushed cheeks from anger, she really caused most male viewers to start nose bleeding. The scene did look a bit perverted as the tentacles were separating her breasts as well as scraping between her legs. Dear Lord, don't tell me he is going to use those tentacles to do hentai stuff to her. Play with her. If I was in his place, I would definitely go for it. Arg! Before the viewers could finish their perverted discussion, they felt their blood run cold at the heinous sight before them. Felix had used his tentacles to rip apart all of Tangle Seeker's limbs and tails simultaneously, causing her to let out the most heart-wrenching scream they ever heard. "If it wasn't for your mother, you will be dead by now," Felix remarked calmly as he threw what remained of Tangle Seeker to the side into a garbage bag. Tangle Seeker cried with snot and tears flowing down her face as she stuttered, "I sorry. Sure ender." Felix had made her too traumatized to even consider staying in this game for another second. 1052 What lies underneath the fog? After he saw that she was gone, Felix cancelled his golden electricity and sprinted in different direction, knowing that there was too much of a disturbance to go unnoticed by the players. Sure, most of the noise was cancelled out with his silencer aura, but there were many other ways to find out about what happened. "Next time, your daughter won't meet with a gentle soul like my student," Lady Sphinx remarked calmly as she eyed Kumiho. "Don't let her participate in Champions Games again." "She is right, you know," Erebus supported with a stern look. Just the adoptive daughter Selpha had raised a bit of backlash for Lady Yggdrasil when they found out about her, don't even mention a biological daughter of a primogenitor. Those games were for entertainment purposes, not cause rifts between each other. Felix didn't want to kill Tangle Seeker since he was told by his masters to avoid slaying any of their biological children, unless they belonged to the Darkin faction. That's because primogenitors were having an extremely difficult times giving birth to children with their current high body limitations. It wasn't like at the very start of the primogenitors era. Felix didn't want to antagonize Kumiho and make her his enemy when he could easily avoid this whole mess. He already had a handful of primogenitors wanting his head. "I wouldn't have cared even if he killed her." Kumiho replied indifferently, she is useless anyway. You really are a certified B*TCH. Erebus criticized at her cold-heartedness. Primogenitors could be cold and distant to their current descendants since the giant generational gap between them severed any kind of intimate connection they had. However, the same didn't apply to current biological children. Thanks for the compliment. Kumiho winked at him before teleporting away from the council. She refused to even glance at Lady Sphinx's direction, knowing that she had nothing to say after losing her bet with her. If her daughter remained within the game until its end, even if she didn't win it, Lady Sphinx would be forced to apologize to Kumiho in public as long as Felix wasn't the champion. However, now that she was out, even if Felix lost, Lady Sphinx was free from the humiliation. 3 more victims falls under landlord's hands. Vinali commentated, looks like he is stepping up his assassination's speed. Felix was indeed pushed to act faster since the red mist was consuming too much of his water elemental energy. He was close to reaching critical level, and he didn't want to completely exhaust his water elemental energy this early. So, he hastened his ambushing speed, not caring any more about being as stealthy as possible. Obviously, this was bound to fire back at him. Why is he moving like that? Nocturne knitted his eyebrows in confusion after spotting Humaniad infrared aura, belonging to a dragon, flying all over the place while breathing multiple fire beams. Unless, landlord. It didn't take even a split second before realizing that he must be battling someone, who was hidden from sensory abilities. Who else but Felix was doing so? Without an ounce of hesitation, Nocturne dove within the fog towards the battle while surrounding his entire body in greenish flames. The instant he was in the firing zone, he opened his mouth widely and breathed fire in the player's direction. This caused the cold misty droplets to evaporate yet again and clear out a vast area, which exposed both Felix and the player on the ground. Landlord! Nocturne yelled furiously while eyeing Felix's indifferent expression. Chance! The black dragonoid's eyes turned frigid all of a sudden the moment he saw Felix's focus getting affected. He pointed his palm in direction of Felix and fired a condensed black beam of flames. Not bothering to even glance at the incoming black beam, Felix merely hardened his hand and slapped the beam away, forcefully changing its direction toward Nocturne. This happened extremely fast. Nocturne wasn't given the time to even comprehend the situation to bother with avoiding the beam. Boom! It landed directly on his chest, causing a small explosion to arise. However, Nocturne emerged from the explosion without even a scratch on his scales. As for the corrosion effect, it was burnt off forcefully by his greenish flames field. Was that an explosion? Nidal's ears perked up from tens of kilometers away after hearing the soft explosion echo. He was the furthest away from the explosion, yet he heard it. Don't even mention the rest of the players. A battle. It must be related landlord. F***ing finally. Get him. Singularity, the bishop, night guard, and the rest of the players all traveled towards the explosion source at their fastest speed. Felix naturally had spotted them, making him understand that if he remained here for another second, he would surround real soon. What will landlord do now? Vinali wondered. He must be running out of tricks by now. Before the viewers could start guessing, Felix entered his hypersonic mode and escaped towards the emptiest area of the arena. You ain't getting away this time. Nocturne turned on the jets as well and stayed on Felix's tail. The other black dragon also chased after them, not wanting to waste this opportunity to steal the crown. Felix knew that Nocturne wouldn't allow him to use the slingshot technique to boost his speed. So, instead of increasing his speed, he decided to slow them down. Unstoppable Tide. Felix activated his third Kraken's ability while facing the 2 dragons. Splosh! A towering tide emerged from Felix's palms and started building up in height and pressure until it resembled an unstoppable tsunami. What was unique about it was its green color. Useless attempts. Nocturne snickered as he pushed his way through the tsunami, knowing that he would be delayed if he went over it. The black dragon did the same as well, confident that water couldn't harm them. He was right, the water really didn't cause them any trouble. However, the instant they emerged from the other side of the tsunami, their faces were all twisted like their souls were being ripped apart. Arg! Bastard! How is my soul burning up? Nocturne cursed with a look filled with anguish. As a green dragon, he had never felt his soul burning up before since they were immune to the effect from their flames. Unfortunately for him, he didn't possess immunity to the effect from water or any other element. Felix took advantage of their reduced speed and put a substantial distance between them. However, he wasn't in the clear yet as another player was seen flying in his direction from the front. Felix swiftly manifested 5 crystallized assault rifles and filled their magazines with true poison bullets. The moment the player entered his range, Felix threw the assault rifles in the air and caught them with his hair tentacles. Then, pa pa pa! He fired them continuously like they were real semi-auto rifles, shooting a shower of bullets at the unfortunate player. The player was none other than Midgard. With his extraordinary mental prowess, he sensed the bullets the instant they entered his mental range, causing him to manifest a telekinesis barrier around him. Instead of the true poison bullets hitting the barrier and bouncing away, they actually had their trajectory changed randomly, causing them to head into countless different directions. When Felix saw this, he knew that no number of bullets will harm Midgard. Still, he didn't care and continued firing at him. His goal was never to kill Midgard but just make him busy enough, he wouldn't be able to block him. His strategy did work as Midgard could only watch Felix speeding past him like a lightning bolt without stopping his bullets barrage for even a second. It wasn't so hard to do so since his tentacles were extremely flexible, allowing him to sprint in a straight line while shouting at a 360-degree. Still, Midgard managed to launch one mental attack at Felix after he surpassed him. You gotta try harder than that. Alas, it wasn't enough to even break apart Felix's psychic shield, not all mental attacks were the same. Just like abilities, the longer preparation and energy was involved, the deadlier the attack would get. In this case, it was just too soft. Unaffected by Felix's mental defenses, Midgard chased after him with a expressionless look, joining the pack. Felix stopped firing his bullets and used another tide to delay his chasers. This time, the dragons were forced to go above it as they would rather not get touched by another water drop again. As for Midgard, his telekinesis barrier protected him as he pierced through the tsunami. Looks like Landlord is at his wit's end. Vinali commentated, I doubt he has enough energy to keep going at this pace for the next 2 hours. Now that his location has been exposed, he better believe that he wouldn't be given another second of spare time. But it doesn't really matter. He had given us an astonishing run and even if the crown was stolen from him, there is a high chance of him emerging victorious at the end of the game. Unbeknownst to Vinali and the viewers, Felix had no intentions of giving away the crown. He was most definitely not done yet. It's time to clear the arena. Felix eyed the fog and the 14 players behind him before murmuring, cancel. The moment he did so, the red mist started to disintegrate into light particles throughout the entire arena. In less than a few seconds, the arena was finally exposed and everyone on it under the brilliant rays of sun. However, not a single player seemed too happy about any of this as the first thing that came in their minds was the abysmal numbers of the players. What the hell happened to everyone? Singularity remarked with widened eyes as she looked at what remained of the players. 30 players entered the arena, only 15 of them remained, not even 1 hour had gone by. This was just too spooky and made all the players feel their blood turn cold. 1053 The Crystal Fortress. Don't tell me Landlord has taken down those players. Nidal's expression turned grim at the mere thought. While they were looking for him, he was hunting them one by one, reducing their numbers while at the same time farming even more points. If he truly got rid of half of the players' population, then his points total should be much higher than we anticipated. Nidal cursed as he spoke to everyone, we have to get the crown from his head as fast as possible if we still want to be in this game." Nocturne and the other 2 royal dragons growled at the sound of joining their forces to handle a single player. As for Singularity, the bishop, and the rest, they weren't so against it anymore. If it were another game, they probably wouldn't have considered working together even if it meant losing the game. But this was the promotion game. In other words, if the Peak Radiant players lost, they would have to wait an entire year to try again. It was even worse for the Empyrean players since their rank would be in jeopardy. If Felix won, he would obtain the rank of the highest Empyrean player he had defeated in his promotion game. When the Empyrean loses, the one with the lowest performance would get demoted back to Radiant. There was no way those 5 Empyreans would allow themselves to get put in that position in the first place. No contracts are required, just don't hit each other and focus only on Landlord until we get the crown back. Singularity sent a message to confirm her participation. Everyone nodded in agreement and continued their chase, sure trusting each other wasn't as reliable as a contract, but this was a promotion game to Empyrean rank. Everyone here weighed their words as gold as they see their reputation to be above all. "It looks like some sort of shift have happened," Asna commented as she ate popcorn while watching the stream in the UVR with the rest of the tenants, who didn't go to the council. Based on their slightly less tensed expressions while near each other, they must have agreed to a partnership. Carbuncle guessed. Everyone else agreed with his statement. The viewers weren't capable of seeing as much, making them still under the assumption that everyone was on his own. "Oh ho! Felix is already going to be pulling the big guns." Asna's eyes brightened up a bit after noticing that Felix started building a gigantic fortress at northern edge of the arena. It wasn't an overstatement to call it a fortress. 8 thick, square towers surround the fortress. They reached twice the height of the walls and were connected by lower, firm walls made of white adamantine gemstones. Tall open windows were scattered here and there across the adamantine walls in an asymmetric pattern, along with crenellations that were usually used for archers and cannons. But in this case, those holes all had assault rifles peeking from them. Those assault rifles were being held by hundreds of humanoid golems with eyes burning up, a mark of intelligence. This wasn't all. Each of the 8 towers had 4 real railguns, facing different directions. All of them were being operated by 2 sentient humanoid golems as well. One responsible overloading the giant bullets and the other was big enough, he could push the railguns around to change their aim. In this fortress, there was no gate at the bottom. However, the entire bottom half was enhanced by another layer of orange olive sling gemstone. Naturally, it was boosted by the mental affecting sacred attribute. Because the fortress was enormous, and it was facing the sun, the orange walls were reflecting light everywhere. In other words, if any player dared to look straight into the light, his mind would be under constant mental attacks. As for creator of all of this, he could be seen sitting in a mediation position with his eyes closed shut within the castle. "What is your boy up to now?" Erebus wondered as he eyed Thor. "I'm not very knowledgeable about your lightning abilities, but I am certain that it shouldn't be easy for him to control thousands of electrical rings simultaneously." This was the first thing that popped off in the minds of all viewers at the sight of this fortified fortress. After all, Felix had to manually fire off the bullets by controlling the electromagnetic waves of the railgun rings. In their eyes, no matter how monstrous he was, it should be impossible for him to manually control thousands of them. "You are right. He isn't at that level yet, but..." Thor smirked faintly as he stared at Felix's hair turning into a glowing 20 tentacles. "He has an ability that makes it possible." Erebus and the rest of the primogenitors raised an eyebrow in surprise after seeing that those tentacles had attached themselves with 20 humanoid golems that resembled Felix greatly. Just like robots gaining life, those clones all showed different expressions as they sprinted towards 20 platforms that were built between them and the fortress walls. Each one of them seemed to have a separate control over an area of the fortress as they kept making gestures with their hands at the other golems, who were operating the weapons. What shocked the viewers to the core was the fact that those golems actually understood their orders and acted on them. Don't tell me! Siren-eyed Thor as she exclaimed, he has inherited that advanced ability of the Kraken. Upon hearing so, the Darken faction's members' expression turned ugly all of a sudden. One soul, many lives, I really never expected to see this ability surface again. Aspidic alone smiled with a look of reminiscence. I should have guessed it right away. Erebus face-palmed, I completely forgot that your boy can unlock all types of abilities from the Kraken. If this ability was the Kraken's ultimate ability, they would have guessed it right away. However, it was just an advanced ability just like Thor's lightning transmutation, parasite discharge, etc. Though, it was more special and believed to be almost on the ranks of an ultimate ability. That's because it allowed the owner to split his consciousness into many wisps. Each had their own thought process and freedom to do anything they wanted. Sounds familiar? That's right, this was the original ability that enabled primogenitors to split their consciousness into many wisps. The founder was none other than the Great Kraken. Unlike other primogenitors, his main researcher focus was on the souls. This enabled him to have a great reach in this field compared to his peers and create the ability to split the consciousness. He was the one who spread this ability to his peers and allowed anyone to learn it if they were capable of mastering it. Even though the Great Kraken had died, no one managed to reach the same level as him in this ability. Oh dear, so this is the end result of combining it with Carbuncle's ultimate ability. Sheriff remarked, how is this any fair to our champions? Unlike the confused viewers, all the primogenitors managed to guess how Felix intended to pull off controlling all of those guns at once. He used one soul, 10,000 lives ability to split his consciousness into 20 wisps. Then, he bestowed life upon all of his golems and picked 20 of them. By connecting those 20 clones with his tentacles, it allowed him to hijack their consciousness and replace them with his own wisps. In other words, even though his eyes were closed shut, he was seeing the entire arena through the eyes of those clones. Here they come! Felix thought to himself as he observed the players halting a couple of kilometers away from the fortress. What's up with those weapons? Night Owl frowned, isn't there a bit too much? Most of them must be useless decoys to scare us off. Singularity reasoned, there is no way in hell, he can control such a massive army. That should be it. The bishop agreed with her assessment. All right, let's attack at once and his plan will be thrown down the gutter. Everyone smiled coldly at the sound of that and prepared their barriers and shields. Attack! The moment the order was given, all of them charged in direction of the fortress while having their offensive abilities active. Nocturne and the other dragons prepared a shower of flaming balls from the sky. The bishop manifested a humongous boulder and placed it on top of his shell, planning to hurl it at the right distance. Night Owl manifested countless condensed energy bombs around his body as he sprinted in the air. Landlord is in big trouble. He is about to suffer from the bombardment of a lifetime. The instant Vinali finished speaking, everyone had already started firing their orbs, bombs, spears, boulders, and whatever projectiles anyone could think of. The entire sky was hidden from this rain of projectiles that was targeting none other than the fortress. Yet, not a single ounce of worry was shown on the faces of Felix's golems, they merely stared at the incoming shower with indifferent looks, waiting patiently for Felix's orders. 3, 2, 1. Felix commanded in his mind calmly, artillery squad, fire. Boom boom boom. Just like the 4th of July fireworks, the entire sky was lit up with bright explosions and a never-seen destruction before, causing both the players and the viewers to have their eyes widened to limit in disbelief. Who could blame them? 32 real railguns fired explosive blasts in the sky, destroying absolutely any kind of ability thrown at the fortress. The rain of fireballs was extinguished, and even the humongous boulder was turned into smaller fragments. Nothing survived from that many railguns blasts fired at the same time. Dear Mother Tree, how is this even conceivable? The assault rifles weren't even used to completely negate their combined assault. Vinali gulped a mouthful as displayed the camera on the smokes emerging from those railguns and the golems reloading them again. It was like they were stating that as long as we stand, nothing was getting close to their fortress. 1054 The Final Battle of Champions. This isn't going as well as we have expected. Nidol was forced to halt in the air, not daring to get too close to the fortress. The rest of the players did the same. How can he control so many railguns at the same time? This doesn't make any sense. Soul Cutter frowned as he eyed the railguns and assault rifles barrels targeting them. He was Jorgamo's champion and one of the remaining peak Radiant players. It's landlord, we should always expect the unexpected. The bishop shared, let's just continue our rush while keeping in mind that he can control every golem. The bishop wasn't fazed in the slightest by the prowess of Felix's army as he trusted in his thick skin and shell to protect him against any kind of bullet. Each on his own. Singularity proclaimed before charging again in direction of the fortress. Everyone looked at each other for a brief moment before following her with their defenses fully erected. They might be working together, but it didn't mean that they would defend or save each other. A bit closer, a bit more. Felix narrowed his eyes at the players, patiently waiting for them to enter the perfect firing range. It was none other than the range where his olive sling's wall was most effective. With their speed, it didn't take them long. What's going on? Vinali exclaimed in shock as he eyed most peak Radiant players falling into the ground with lost expressions, leaving only the Empyrean players. F***CK. It's the light reflected from the orange wall. Don't look at it. Singularity shouted while covering her eyes. Although the metal attack didn't put her in a hallucination world like the other peak Radiant players, it was still constantly bashing her mental defenses. This made it hard for her to focus on her assault. The only one unaffected by the olive sling wall was Midgard as he continued his charge with deadpan expression. Fire all! Boom boom! SZLZLZLZLZ. Before the players could escape from the hallucination world, the railguns and assault rifles all rained down on them with different bullets. Some unfortunate players got their armors penetrated by true poison bullets, grazing them slightly. If poison wasn't involved, this wouldn't have been a problem. Alas! Every one of them ended up suffering the horrible effects of the poison, causing them to turn into shriveled corpses on the ground. Some ended up having an explosive railgun red bullets landed near them, which heavily injured them and left them bleeding profusely. Some were unlucky to find themselves captured within a small version of a green lightning storm, which paralyzed them and burned their souls simultaneously. The only players who survived from this attack were the remaining champions. I can't believe this. 8 players had been removed from the equation before even touching the crystal fortress walls. The viewers joined him with passionate cheers at the sight of players' army getting bombarded to Narnia. Because they were under the hallucination effect, they had lost all of their elemental defensive abilities on them, leaving them completely naked to bullets salvo. The surviving Empyreans and champions merely cursed them off for being useless baggage and left them behind to their inevitable death. Destroy the orange wall. Leave it to me. Midgard replied calmly as he aimed a finger at the olive sling wall. Then, there was no wall to speak of any longer. The olive sling wall was broken into smaller crystals with a single invisible telekinesis wave. The instant it fell apart, the players were freed from their hallucinations. Alas, it was already too late as the majority were either dead or too injured to avoid the incoming bullets. I sir, surrender. Get me out, Queen. I give up. Still, there were a few lucky ones, who managed to teleport themselves the instant they realized that their life would be doomed if they remained another split second. This left only 7 players behind, all of them were Primogenitor's champions. Destroy the fortress. Singularity connected her hands together, making her create a reverse gravity field around her. This caused all the bullets fired in her direction to halt in their path and get sent back towards the golems and the towers. Bam bam bam! Golems started getting smashed away from their positions by those bullets, they were tough enough to survive getting destroyed, but they were hopeless against the force. Yet, the worst hit wasn't even this, as Felix's clones also suffered from Singularity's counterattack, making them abandon their posts. When that happened, their squads were turned useless as the bullets couldn't be fired without the electrical rings being operated. This ended up reducing the pressure on those champions, making them get even more aggressive in their counterattack. It had gotten so bad, Night Owl managed to penetrate the crystal fortress on his own and started breaking apart the railguns in the towers. With those bad boys gone, the crystal fortress was turned into a free real estate for anyone to penetrate. So that's why. Nightguard mewed in his mind after sensing consciousness waves being released from the clones. This should do it. Nightguard snapped his finger casually, causing all the clones to turn into lifeless crystal statues. He used his overbearing mind to completely crush the defenseless wisps of Felix's consciousness. That hurt a bit. Felix was forced to open his eyes while his nose was bleeding after losing more than 20 wisps of his consciousness at the same time. He anticipated this much to happen, but he didn't expect for Nightguard to be this quick and brutal in his counterattack, not allowing him even a second to recall his wisps. Though, it didn't matter much to him since this was merely the UVR and his consciousness would become whole again after the game. The only bad news is that I can't use them again in this game. Felix cleaned his nose with his sleeve while standing up. What kind of tricks and tactics is Landlord still hiding under his sleeves? Vinali commentated as he watched the heart of the crystal fortress getting bombarded. Felix was hidden within the heart and surrounded by those 7 champions. Even the viewers started believing that Felix was preparing another tactic for this. Who could blame them? Felix simply seemed to never run out of tricks and strategies. Unbeknownst to them, Felix had nothing unique to offer anymore. He beamed his crescent battleaxe and placed it on his shoulder, then, he covered it with greenish electricity. Tricks? Tactics? Felix merely used them to reduce the numbers of players while being on the safe side. This didn't mean that he would be utterly hopeless without them. Felix turned his hair into 4 tentacles and placed them on the ground, lifting him up akin to Dr. Octopus from Spider-Man. Then, he tightened his grasp on the crescent battleaxe and narrowed his eyes dangerously at Nightguard, who was floating above the crystal fortress. Let's start with you. 1055 The Final Battle of Champions. LL. Without an ounce of hesitation, Felix bent his tentacles to the limits and propelled himself towards the crystal ceiling. The instant he was about to smash his head with the ceiling, it broke into light particles. Whoosh! Felix emerged from the crystal fortress akin to a rocket, catching everyone's by surprise. The instant he appeared before Nightguard, he swung his electrical crescent battleaxe as hard as he could. VVVVVRRRR. Just like it was caught by an invisible arm, the crescent battleaxe was twisted in a weird way between it and Nightguard. This was the work of the invisible telekinesis barrier. You thought? Felix shouted loudly as he tripled his size, which enhanced his physical force by a considerable amount. This worked quite well as the axe kept edging towards Nightguard's neck faster than before. Everyone knew that the instant the battleaxe touches Nightguard's neck, it would be separated instantly. Their physical defenses were just as laughable as spirit foxes. Not under my watch. Unfortunately, the other champions weren't planning to let Felix have free rein in fighting them, as Night Owl sent a giant transparent condensed fist made out of energy in his direction. It smashed against Felix's body and sent him flying away. You finally fell under my clutches. Singularity laughed sinisterly above Felix and sent a palm to the ground. No one saw anything, however. Felix felt 100 times the pressure of gravity on his shoulders, causing him to get launched into the ground rapidly. Boom! The moment he smashed into the hard arena floor, Singularity fired a series of gravity palms at Felix, causing him to get buried a few meters deep under. Leave the rest to me. Nocturne proclaimed as he took a deep breath and fired another condensed beam at the burial hole. The other dragon joined him in firing his own condensed beam, causing the hole to start emitting smoke like they were barbecuing a pig. I will handle it from here. The bishop slapped his fat webbed foot on the ground, causing the hole to start closing while Felix was still inside. The moment he finished, everyone eyed the ground silently, waiting for Queen Ai's announcement that the crown was taken away or any kind feedback that their efforts worked. Unfortunately, the feedback they received didn't please them one bit. He is still alive. Midgard disclosed calmly as he looked at Felix's strong brainwaves. Then, let's bury him even deeper. Soul Cutter said. They knew that it wasn't necessary to kill Felix to remove the crown from him. They could just force him to remain underground for half a minute, and he would be kicked out of the arena for breaking the rules. Singularity placed one palm above the other and pushed down while shouting, "Gravity level x 1000." With gravity reaching this level, the air started to turn wavy so as the sun rays. If even the air and light was affected, there was no way Felix would be able to push through it and escape from the ground. To completely get rid of any hope for Felix, Nidal, the bishop, and Soul Cutter joined the efforts. 20 more seconds and Landlord would lose out the crown. Vinali yelled at the mic, "Is this finally it for Landlord's ownership of the crown? It's about damn time." Soros scoffed in irritation. He would have preferred Felix dying, but he knew that would take an insane amount of effort even when all of their champions combined their forces against him. Removing the crown first was priority as their champions could finally start collecting points and join the race. Rumble rumble. Abruptly, everyone was forced to lift their heads and look above them after the sky started rumbling thunderously. What they saw made their expression turn a bit ugly as it was hidden behind a giant dark thundercloud. What was unique about it was the lightning bolts having multiple colors. Before this could register in their minds, the sky started raining down with hundreds of thick lightning bolts, smashing everything within a 1 kilometer radius around the burial zone. Arg! Singularity couldn't help but groan in agony after a green lightning bolt landed directly on her body. The electricity did nothing much to her, but the soul-burning effect made her unable to stay still under this storm. The same applied to the rest of the players. Even the bishop had a grim expression as he tried his best to take cover under an umbrella made out of rocks. Why the F***ck does his elemental attacks burn our souls? Nocturne cursed with a confused and pissed off expression. He went through the same pain earlier after getting hit by the tsunami, making him assume that his water was special. But, only now did he understand that all of Felix's elements were too abnormal. Even the primogenitors were a bit curious about the different attributes on Felix's elements. However, they didn't ask, knowing that it had to do with Lady Sphinx's experiments. They understood that she wouldn't entertain their question. Boom! While the players were defending themselves from the thunderstorm, Felix dug himself through the blockage and escaped the area, where the gravity was most disoriented. Only then did he drill himself to the surface. The moment he escaped, he found that Midgard was waiting for him since he was the only one capable of tracking him through his brainwaves. Sleep. Midgard mewed with an enticing voice that assaulted Felix's ears. Too weak. Felix remarked coldly as he jumped towards Midgard, not feeling even a bit sleepy after getting hit by his mental attack. Defend against this. Felix swung his crescent axe a few meters away from Midgard's barrier. A thick blade of blue electrical discharges was released from the axe and landed directly on Midgard. The telekinesis barrier did a great job distorting most of the electrical discharges. Too bad, the rest was just too fast and slippery to be blocked as well. SZLZLZLZ. A direct hit. Vinali exclaimed as he watched Midgard's killer bee body being covered entirely in blue electrical discharges. What startled the viewers was the fact that both smoke and chilling air was released from his body. This uncomfortable feeling of being shocked as well as chilled made it hard for Midgard to focus on his barrier. Felix planned for this result. He didn't hesitate to spin around himself while turning his battleaxe into two blades connected with long vines. He took advantage of their length to attach themselves with Midgard, holding him like they were ropes. This wasn't enough as Felix used his tentacles to hold him as well and tightened their grasp on his wings specifically, making him unable to fly. Landlord. Night Owl attempted to save Midgard again by assaulting Felix with another fist made out of neutral energy. But, Felix wasn't known to be fooled twice in a row. Thank you, he proclaimed with a faint smirk as he swung Midgard in direction of the energy fist, causing him to get struck by it directly. PS. Midgard wasn't like Felix, he ended up bleeding internally immediately after the collision. Naturally, the force was strong enough it sent both Felix and Midgard away from the pack and the thunderstorm. It's time for you to make an early exit. Felix's evil smile was reflected on Midgard's 5 eyes, making him understand that he wasn't going to survive what was about to come. I surrender, he announced without a change of expression, causing his body to get disintegrated into light particles. He really made the right decision as the moment he disappeared, Felix's tentacles and his green vines were all covered in red electrical arcs. A moment later, and he would have turned into fine dust. Midgard is out. Midgard is actually the first to get kicked out. Vinali cried out loud in shock. His reaction was shared by most viewers as they knew that Midgard possessed the highest Empyrean rank in this game. Unlike the others, he was ranked as 477. Damn your little brat! Siren expressed with a frustrated look after her second champion got eliminated. Now, she was officially out of the bet, and it was all caused by Felix alone. Don't be too saddened, the others will join you soon. Thor smirked as he watched Felix charging towards the bishop proactively. The fun is just starting. 10:56 The final battle of the champions. LLL. Just as Felix was about to hurl his crescent battleaxe at the bishop, an army of spiders rushed him from every direction. They were all made out of hardened white silk. Web him! Soul Cutter ordered loudly as he surfed on top of the spiders' army. Phew phew phew! The thousands of spiders all spewed long lines of wet silk in direction of Felix, covering the entire sky above him. Vermilion electrical field. Felix countered this attack by engulfing the surrounding area with a vermilion field of lightning tongues. Most viewers assumed that the silk strings would get burnt off the instant they enter the field, but they couldn't be any more wrong. They broke through the field safely. As expected of Soul Cutter's unique all-elemental resistant silk. Vinali commentated loudly as he watched Felix being forced to avoid the shower of silky strings. Damn it! It can even resist against such a potent field. Felix cursed as he covered himself with an armor made out of white adamantine, knowing that he would get caught eventually by them. He did his researcher and read that Soul Cutter's strings were highly resistant to all elements, only a few pure-blooded spider can inherit this astonishing trait for their silk. If it wasn't for it, Soul Cutter had no place in contesting for a promotion. But, Felix had tested it out in his practice runs and understood that his field's potency should be more than enough to deal with mere strings. You think I am that foolish to not prepare against your preparation? Soul Cutter smirked as he waved an empty weirdly shaped potion in Felix's face. No wonder. The instant Felix saw the potion, he immediately figured out why his calculations weren't precise. I believe that's a rank 5 potion, elemental amplification. It provides the consumer with 15 minutes of insane amplification to all of his elemental abilities. Vinali exposed after running the bottle with the database. Now die! Soul Cutter slapped his hands together, causing all of his spiders to jump on Felix and start exploding into a gooey silky substance. The amount was crazy, and to make matters worse, Felix knew that he wouldn't be able to cut it apart with his battleaxe. His silk was just too wet and flexible, making it impossible for any hard surface to touch it, no matter how much strength was applied. The electrical field had been utterly extinguished like fire camp having a bucket of water pouring on it at once. Good work, Cutter! Night Owl praised as he eyed the emerging cocoon that covered Felix entirely. Kill him before he escapes from underground. Nocturne shouted as he prepared to dive at the cocoon with his claws ready for slaughter. I have already taken care of the underground. Soul Cutter stopped him, just help me make sure that he won't leave the cocoon. As he mentioned, the chaotic pool of silk was already turned into a perfected cocoon that enclosed on Felix from all areas, even the ground. This is bad. Selfa bit her lips nervously as she watched some champions cast their pressuring abilities to lock down on Felix. Spiderkin silk is extremely tough to break. Don't even mention Soul Cutter's silk that was amplified by a potion. Baron frowned. Felix might be in trouble this time. During the Primogenitor's event, Red Mercy was forced to cast a nuke near his face to free himself from the Spiderkin's cocoon. So, it shouldn't really be underestimated. Hammer of Pureness. Soil Grave. To make matters worse for Felix, the other champions used their own abilities to make sure that he wouldn't wiggle even a little within the cocoon. Singularity didn't cast this time since she knew that her gravity would ruin her teammates' abilities as well. Will Landlord cast another thundercloud to save him? It looks like they are already prepared against. Before Vinali could finish his sentence, he was surprised to see hundreds of pointy sharp crystals peek from the ceiling of the cocoon. Then, boom! The cocoon ruptured into tiny pieces and was followed by the explosion of the hardened grave. Felix emerged in the open as a giant while covered completely with long thin and sharp crystals, making him resemble a porcupine. Smart, silk might be extremely difficult to penetrate from one spot due to its flexibility, but if it was attacked by thousands of pointy objects at once, its flexibility will be subjugated. Siren nodded. That's precisely what Felix did. He might have been caught off guard by the amplification potion, but he also prepared a way to free himself if he ever got caught by Soul Cutter. Whoosh! Not giving time for the champions to react, Felix swung a punch at Nocturne, who was flying right beside him. Unfortunately, Nocturne managed to evade it effortlessly because of the size difference, making Felix's fist seem to be moving in slow motion. It was like a human trying to punch a fly. You went exactly where I wanted you. Felix smirked in his mind as he opened his fists wide and launched gigantic green lightning bolts at Nocturne from his fingers. Lightning bolt's speed wasn't affected in the slightest even if its size was increased, causing Nocturne to get hit by most of them directly. Felix's punches weren't for show as he threw them to force Nocturne into the perfect striking area, which was between his 10 fingers. SZLZLZLZLZL. Roar! Nocturne roared loudly in agony as he kept twitching in the sky, incapable of even moving an inch. His body might not be in pain, but his soul was on the verge of collapse after getting burned 3 times in a row. All 3 hits to his souls in this game didn't heal properly since souls took an extremely long time to recover unlike flesh wounds. This caused them to build up on each other until this very moment, where he could feel his soul barrier cracking and about to explode at any given second. I surrender! I surrender! As a proud dragon as he was, he still didn't hesitate to surrender to save himself from receiving the worst kind of death in the universe. Soul destruction. Even the most proud dragon would never deny himself from the chance of either rebirth or visiting the spirit realm after his death. Queen killing the consciousness had nothing to do with soul getting completely extinguished from existence. Another Empyrean is down. Vinali shouted excitedly as he displayed the ugly expressions of the remaining champions. They were 7 champions and 5 of them were Empyreans, yet, their numbers were being reduced one by one against a single player. Even if it was against the monstrous Felix, this was still too humiliating for them. Whoosh whoosh whoosh! Dark's soul! Watch out! Night Owl warned loudly after seeing Felix's hair tentacles speeding towards the black humanoid dragon akin to octopus's tentacles seeking their prey. Thanks to the warning, Dark Soul managed to evade them in time and even counterattack by shooting giant flaming snakes at Felix. Because of his towering size, Felix didn't even bother to evade them, he elbowed one and punched the other, causing them to explode into black flames that covered his arms. Felix might be fine against the heat, but the corrosion attribute did manage to start eating his skin rapidly, especially when he had to remove his void suit since it couldn't cover his entire giant body. As they say, fire fight fire. To get rid of the corrosion, Felix covered his arm in white electricity that possessed healing sacred attribute, this helped remove the flames from his arm while at the same time healing his skin. What the hell? How can we even harm this F***er? Soul Cutter cursed in frustration at the sight of Felix's brand new arms. He isn't a god. Night Owl replied calmly as he manifested a long sword made completely out of condensed neutral energy. Usually, neutral energy was transparent while leaning slightly to white. But, this sword was almost milky white, which entailed that the amount of neutral energy packed within it was insane. Pow pow pow! With a mere 3 steps in air, Night Owl appeared in Felix's face and swung that giant milky white sword at his neck. Felix pulled back his neck, evading the swift slice reflexively. Then, he counter-attacked by assaulting Night Owl with his tentacles from 4 directions. Cute attempt. Night Owl narrowed his eyes and spun around himself the instant the tentacles were about to collide with him. Slice 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 slice. Just like a sushi chef, the heads of the tentacles were all cut evenly by his angelic sword and started falling into the ground. Arg! Felix cried out loud in agony while shaking the sliced tentacles around, seeming like he truly suffered from massive damage. Night Owl took advantage of this and threw his white sword at Felix's heart area as hard as he could. PSS. The sword penetrated Felix's chest and landed directly on his human heart. Night Owl wasn't done yet as he brought his hands together and shouted, "Explode!" Boom! The white sword exploded into a swallowed hand grenade within Felix's chest, leaving behind a giant hole that showcased bloody mess for the viewers and the players. The explosion was deadly enough. All 3 hearts were taken out instantly, making everyone too stunned to speak. Was this it? Did he actually die in this manner? How did things lead to here? Questions like those coursed on the viewers' minds, refusing to believe that Felix's end would be this underwhelming. Unfortunately, the reality before them was quite bitter as everyone knew that even if Felix was a god, he wouldn't survive without a heart. I told you, he isn't a god. Night Owl smiled coldly as he watched Felix fall down on his knees while bleeding everywhere, resembling a fallen titan. Let's finish him. Night Owl ordered as he started creating a giant transparent sphere, planning to blow Felix's head up. Singularity, Soul Cutter, the Bishop, and Dark Soul all joined him in creating their strongest offensive strike, not daring to go soft against Felix even in this condition. While everyone was holding their breaths and had their eyes affixed on the execution, no one noticed the 4 separated tentacles twitching on the ground. 10:57 The final battle of the champions LV. Fire! The moment everyone finished their preparation, they launched their attacks simultaneously at Felix's head. Before they could feel relieved at the notion of getting rid of Felix, a faint sinister smirk emerged on his face. Immediately after seeing it, their hearts skipped a beat. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Unfortunately, just as they wanted to raise their guards to the maximum, their backs were assaulted in the blink of an eye by the 4 separated tentacles. The tentacles didn't bash them, but separated into tens of smaller ones and rolled around their bodies until they were incapable of moving an inch. Only the bishop wasn't attacked by them due to his immense size. Break! Night Owl and the rest swiftly attempted to escape from the tentacles' clutches, believing that they could easily overpower them. Sadly, the tentacles still hadn't finished their job. SZZLZLZLZLZ. Each tentacle start releasing an insane amount of green electrical discharges non-stop, causing even the toughest of them to start screaming out loud in agony. Their strength was instantly sapped from them after their souls were targeted, making them unable to escape from the tentacles' clutches. They couldn't even use their abilities since their focus was all over the place from the soul pain. The bishop was left shocked to the core by the sight of his teammates all fallen into the ground while twitching with foam in their mouths. Hold on. Naturally, he knew that he had to save them as there was no way he could take care of Felix on his own. Where do you think you're going? Too bad, Felix wasn't going to let him ruin his strategy after he went through so much to pull it off. Unbeknownst to the players and the viewers, Felix allowed himself to have his tentacles separated as well as eat the sword attack in his hearts. He could have easily avoided them by either shrinking or shielding himself with white adamantine. But, he knew that if those champions weren't baited to let down their guards even slightly, this battle was going to last for hours if not more. It might even end up forcing him to exit the arena and lose the primogenitor's bet. How did you even survive, you unkillable cockroach? The bishop shouted angrily at Felix, who was standing in front of him with his normal size. He was covered entirely in pure white electrical discharges, helping him restore his hearts and close his chest wounds. You're not worthy to know. Felix replied calmly as he manifested 4 golems with crystal white swords that were filled to the brim with purplish liquid. Then, he bestowed life upon them and sent them towards the Night Owl and the others to finish them off. Honestly, he didn't even need to do so, as those champions started to give up on the game one by one when they realized that their soul barriers were on the verge of explosion. None of them dared to risk having such a death. This what made Felix's green lightning extremely deadly and hard to handle. In the case of green flames, they could easily be dodged since they were slow, but lightning? Most players wouldn't even know what hit them before they find themselves in deep agony. Dear Mother Tree! How did things end up like this? Vinali almost lost his shit when he saw that only Felix and the bishop remained in the arena. Ho 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 ho! Meanwhile, the viewers went absolutely bonkers as they kept screaming with reddened cheeks and smoke escaping from their ears. The heat within them was too much, they needed to vent somehow. Even the primogenitors were left shocked speechless by this turn of events. How did he not die even after his entire chest got blown out? Saurus gritted his teeth in anger as he stared at Lady Sphinx. Is he even a human anymore or a monster born from your wicked experiments? The primogenitors could excuse Felix's ability to control separated tentacles as they knew that Kraken's tentacles behaved that way, but not this. It seemed that no one bothered to consider that Felix might have inherited Kraken's internal system. It was quite normal as it was an impossibility in their eyes. Siren, Cheruf, Jorgamo, and even Aspidicelone started believing that Felix was no longer a human after his latest performance. Monstrous physical strength, mental defenses capable of making a joke of even Midgard and Kumiho's daughter, 3 limited manipulations, peculiar elemental attributes, and now even an undying body. Siren smiled wryly, I would be a fool to believe that your boy is still a human. Everyone nodded in support. Their guess wasn't too far-fetched as Felix barely counted as a third of a human after all the experiments he went through. Still, Lady Sphinx refused to comment and merely pointed at the stream, keep watching, the game isn't over yet. As she said, the bishop had no intentions of giving up without putting a decent fight. He slammed his feet on the ground and turned it into a muddy area after seeing Felix rushing in his direction. Felix jumped in the air, avoiding the mud, but the bishop predicted as much. Soil spears! He shouted as he manipulated the mud to start firing hundreds of sticky spears in direction of Felix. Felix used a circular crystal shield to block the muddy spears. However, he wasn't capable of doing so for long as the mud on his shield was broke into slithering snakes and went up his arms. Then, they hardened, making it difficult to control the shield anymore. As for the bishop, he pulled back his limbs inside his shell and swiftly slid away on the mud, clearly wanting to annoy Felix as much as possible. Whoosh whoosh whoosh! He wasn't just escaping for the sake of running away, he kept moving around Felix rapidly in a giant circle while firing hundreds of soil projectiles from every direction. You really are a pain in the ass. Felix cursed as he kept avoiding the projectiles and smashing others with his tentacles. The fact that he was standing on the mud didn't make it any easier as the bishop was constantly trying to take hold of his legs. If only he still had his wings, this fight would have ended in a jiffy. The bishop might have slim chances of winning this, but if Landlord makes any mistakes, he might get punished heavily for it. Vinali commentated. Before the viewers could discuss his analysis, they were startled to see Felix spewing a flood of blue water around him. The purplish water merged with the mud and turned it more liquefied. This was enough to turn any mud-based ability useless since it lost its sticky effect and made it much harder for the bishop to toughen it. Felix wasn't done yet, because it was turned into watered mud now, he was capable of walking on it. Whoosh! Felix sprinted into the wind in direction of the bishop. The instant he was near him, he jumped in the air and pointed his palm in direction of the water. Unstoppable tide. The small muddy lagoon was turned into a layered towering brown tsunami while rushing towards the bishop. Unbreakable wall. The bishop blocked the tsunami swiftly by rising his own enormous hard wall. Boom! The unstoppable tsunami was unfortunately halted since it lacked enough force and momentum to overwhelm it. Felix wasn't disappointed by this, as the tsunami did its job by bringing him in the water above the bishop. Abysmal waterspout. 1058 The Empryian Human King. Felix activated his fifth water ability while pointing at the bishop. Splash! Splash! All the water near him and the bishop started to circle itself until it manifested into a towering dreadful brownish waterspout. Felix was picked up by the waterspout and started spinning with it while going up and up. As for the bishop, he tucked himself inside his shell and reinforced his defenses by covering himself in a earthling dome. This made it impossible for the waterspout to pick him up. Felix didn't give him a peaceful time as he controlled the waterspout to place him exactly in the eye of the storm. What is landlord doing? Doesn't he know that Tornado's weak spot is the eye of the storm? Vinali exclaimed in confusion. Just as the viewers were about to agree with him, Felix launched another thunderstorm right above the waterspout. This made them merge together, making it really resemble a natural disaster. Rumble rumble! Rumble! It might look like a natural disaster, but Felix had complete control over it as he aimed all the released lightning bolts at the bishop. The dome was cracked right away, but the bishop reinforced it again. Each time the lightning bolts caused some damage to it, the cracks and fissures healed almost instantaneously. When it came to defenses, heavenly turtles were almost unkillable if they desired to focus purely on their protection. Honestly, Felix should just leave him alone and keep buying time until the end of the game. Elnora said. Don't you know, Felix? There are still 2 hours or less before the end of the game. Moana rolled her eyes at her. There is no way he would accept wasting 2 hours when he can do something to end the game faster. As she mentioned, Felix had no plans of playing slow after reaching this stage of the game. You asked for it. Felix narrowed his eyes dangerously at the bishop before surfing on the waterspout to reach the thunderstorm. The moment he escaped from the waterspout's pressure, he allowed himself to be caught by lightning bolts, making him suspended in the thunderstorm without needing support. Channel everything on me. Felix commanded the thunderstorm akin to a god, making him get struck by hundreds if not thousands of green lightning bolts simultaneously. This caused his long hair to stand up straight while glowing in green/blue color akin to a light bulb. As for his eyes, they were flashing almost a blinding green light too. Yet, what frightened the viewers was the fact that there was so much electricity building around Felix, it was hard to see him anymore. Did it finally stop? The bishop thought to himself after realizing that the lightning bolts stopped hitting his dome. Screw this, I will make his life hell from underground. Now that he was free of pressure, the bishop didn't hesitate to start digging underneath him. Just as half of his body was already within the ground, he felt shivers coursing on his spine, making him feel like his ass was being targeted. His instincts were in the right place as Felix was pointing a glowing green finger directly at the bishop's bottom that remained on the surface. Thunder God's decree. With the softest voice ever, Felix mew-mewed as he gathered all the absorbed lightning into the tip of his finger. Then, there was no then. The sky turned brighter, the waterspout imploded, the ground shook, and the thunderstorm dispersed. All of this happened in a split second and in absolute silence before all the sounds converged at once, creating a deafening harmony. Yet, the viewer's eyes never left the magnificent thin green beam of light that emerged from Felix's finger and went deep underground. It looked harmless and weaker compared to Nocturne's fire beams. If the bishop was still alive, he would have definitely cursed anyone who believed this. His ending was abrupt and unexpected as the green beam didn't just penetrate his giant body but also crashed his soul barrier almost instantaneously, not allowing him even the time to comprehend what happened. Don't even mention surrendering. The instant the green beam died out, peacefulness returned to the arena as no one was left to fight, only Felix, who had just landed on the ground near the giant hole. When his hair returned to normal, the holographic crown appeared more real, shimmering with brilliant golden light on top of his head. 4. With everything that had just transpired in the entire game, it really made him look majestic and deserving of being proclaimed as the king of the arena. Congratulations to Landlord for winning the game by eliminating all of his opponents. Ho-oh-ah. Landlord. 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 The instant the Queen AI made such an announcement 3 times, the stadium exploded with frenzied chants and booming screams. He actually killed a heavenly turtle with one ability. Enir gulped a mouthful in fear as he recalled the last scene. I can't believe this. He really won this game by eliminating all the players while he merely needed to survive their hunt. Elnora exclaimed speechlessly. Isn't this an astonishing achievement on its own that far surpassed breaking the record? Baron raised an eyebrow as he disclosed, after all, not even Elder Dragon has done this before. Just like he agreed with him, Vinali commented passionately, Landlord just keep breaking ceilings over and over again. I bet my entire fortune that his rank in the Hall of Fame will be lifted significantly. Everyone with common sense thought the same. Sure, the fact that the game ended early ruined Felix's chance to break Elder Dragon's record, but it shouldn't really matter that much. What he had just achieved was 100 times more remarkable than holding a mere record. 29 solo eliminations in a Empyrean promotional game. Siren rubbed her eyelids with a tired look. I am starting to fear landing against you in the future Empyrean games. Likewise, you guys have really cultivated a little monster. Erebus rubbed his beardless chin thoughtfully, maybe, I will adopt a human as well and see what I can do with him. Forget it, without Lady Sphinx's extraordinary modifications, your human will remain crap. Cherif shook his head in disapproval. Trying won't hurt, and I am quite bored as well. Erebus shrugged his shoulders before congratulating Felix's masters and then teleporting away. As for Saurus, Mananangel, and Wendigo? The instant singularity died, they escaped with their tails between their legs, knowing that Thor wasn't going to be merciful with his nasty remarks. The Empyrean Human King. The Empyrean Human King. The Empyrean Human King. The Empyrean Human King. The moment Felix was teleported back to the stadium, he found himself showering under a new extraordinary chant. Looks like they merged your game title with your new rank and race. Asna disclosed in his mind the moment she was allowed to speak again. It's not so bad. Felix smiled as he waved his hand at the never-ending sea of spectators around him. After this game, Felix could be considered as an Empyrean ranked player and one of the top strongest 500 players in the universe. A human had finally reached the pinnacle, the SG Alliance platform. Just hitting this rank alone was enough to write player's name on the Hall of Fame. It was that hard to reach it. Honestly, I am still in disbelief that a human has etched his name in this highly contested noble list. Vinali commentated with a surreal tone, don't even mention the fact that he did it in less than 15 years. From his performance, it doesn't look like this is his limit yet, just unbelievable. The moment Vinali was done speaking, another waves of cheers resounded throughout the whole stadium. Felix waved his hand one last time in appreciation before disintegrating into light particles. Empyrean game or a bronze game, Felix never stayed for the winner ceremony, and he wasn't planning on breaking the record. I am sorry about your champion, but he really asked for it. Thor stood up and went to pat Aspidakelone in the shoulder. Sigh, you don't have to tell me. Aspidakelone smiled wryly before wishing them good luck and exiting the council. What happened to the bishop did sting Aspidakelone a bit, since Felix's last ability didn't just kill his champion, but completely obliterated his soul. Felix didn't name it Thunder God's decree for no reason. He knew that if he ever was forced to use it, not even gods could save his enemy. 1059 The Empyrean Rank Unique System. Phew, that was a refreshing shower. Felix let out a long exhale in relief as he stepped out of the shower room, wearing only a towel around his waist. The network has exploded when you were showering. Asna shared as she read many holographic articles while sitting in the couch. Is it the game or something else? Felix asked. It's the SG committee new announcement. Asna sent a hologram in his direction. When Felix read it, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows in surprise. They are really being generous with me. The SG committee had decided to give Felix a new unique title that was based on his fans' chants, the Empyrean Human King. The possessor of this title would be awarded with at least 10 points, which translated to 10 achievements scored at once. This had pushed Felix's rank in the Hall of Fame straight to top 15. This wasn't all, as Felix was allowed to change his SG name from Unpaid Landlord to the Empyrean Human King if he desired. Naturally, the other players from different races could steal this title from Felix if they managed to pull off what he did and in a much lesser time. Looks like they will change the human to another race if someone else robbed me. Felix chuckled, good luck to them, I guess. Are you planning to change your name? Asna giggled, doesn't it look much cooler? Nah, I am not too interested. Felix shook his head with a faint smile, I am satisfied with Landlord. Felix understood that Empyrean players were all given the option to change their in-game names to something related more to their current status only if they reached a certain rank. For him to be given the option right from the start was quite outstanding. Still, he had no intentions of changing Landlord. He knew that it was more than just a name now, it was his unique brand in the universe. What are you going to do now? Kick off a few more Empyrean ranked games? Asna wondered. Yes, I need to climb past the top 400 as fast as possible before my grace period ends. Felix nodded. Felix understood that he was still not in the safe side of the Empyrean list. As long as he was below top 400, the platform would put him in mandatory promotional games to defend his position. Only after he climbed past top 400 would he be relieved from those duties. Fortunately, newly promoted players were given 2 years grace period that excused them from those mandatory promotional games. After all, it wouldn't feel good to get promoted and end up placed in another promotional game the next day, just to lose it and get demoted. Let's see how much points I need to hit top 400. Felix sat next to Asna and displayed the top 500 holographic list. / 1. Berserth, the Elder Dragon. 2. Lakaka, the Space Worm High Chieftain. 3. The Hive Queen's Guardian and 0. 4. Aquaries, the Heavenly Turtle's Minister. 10. Alfreda Olafil, Queen of the 9 Elvish Realms. 11. Everly, the Fisherman Queen, 10,000 E-points. 12. Aline, the Vampire's Duchess, 9,000 E-points. 200. Ivry Otto, Pandion's Champion, 2,000 E-points. 400. Drusilla Braxton, Demon Blood, 500 E-points. 477. Felix Maxwell, Unpaid Landlord, 279 E-points // The list was quite long and separated into 2 sections, the top 10 section and the rest of the players. Felix understood that the separation was necessary since the top 10 players operate under their own special rank as well as system. For starters, they weren't called Empyrean players, but the top 10 Supremes. For Empyrean players to replace one of the Supremes, they needed to collect 10,000 Empyrean points, only then would they be given a single chance to challenge any Supreme besides Elder Dragon. If they won, they would take their position and be given another single chance to defeat the Elder Dragon and reach the true apex of the platform. Unfortunately, nothing about any of this was easy. That's because players could earn points based on their performance in games as well as lose them for the same reason. 279 E-points, there is a long way before I reach 10,000. Felix remarked as he eyed his own rank and total of points. Just like racial games, Felix had taken Midgard's points with his rank. The only way to hasten your climb is by always giving the best performance as well as winning the game in the end. Asna mentioned. Well, it won't be easy when everyone will have the same thought. Felix smiled wryly. Felix understood that Empyrean Games format was nothing like what he was used to in individual games. That's because most of the games would place Empyrean players into either groups, teams, or partnerships from the get-go. It was done like this since the numbers of Empyrean players was too abysmal. Instead of making games with 30 individual players, the platform creates games that require 4 teams or such. The winner team would be given a multiplier to Empyrean points they earned from their performance. Only the player with the most collected points in a single game would be proclaimed as the champion/MVP and obtain another multiplier to his points. This implied that those players would be required to work in contest with each other to secure both the team's multiplier and the individual's multiplier. Naturally, none of this would work if the platform didn't make it mandatory for the players to participate at least one game a year. Only the top 10 players were excused from this rule. As for the retired Empyrean players, they were also required to play one game a year to keep themselves away from receiving points reduction penalty. Even the dead Empyrean players weren't left alone as their names get removed from the list while their rank get taken by the next player. This chain would keep going until all the players get bumped a rank higher to free the last rank in the list. This empty rank would be contested for in a promotional game that consisted only of peak Radiant players, who failed to get promoted 5 times. It was done like this to reward the players, who never given up on their promotion even after many series of failures. Since Midgard's rank was higher than the bishop, even after his death, Felix's rank remained the same since the bump affected only those below the bishop's rank. Let's see when is the earliest game. Felix closed the list and visited the SG Alliance website, then, he entered the Empyrean side of the website that was locked for everyone but those on the list. The first thing that popped up in front of him was a short list consisting of 10 games in total. The games' names were hidden so as the players. The only thing visible was the number of contestants, the average rank of the games, and lastly the time they would be held. The nearest game is in 3 months while the last one is in 6 months. Felix rubbed his chin thoughtfully. The one in 3 months has an average rank of 355.5. Asna commentated, doesn't that mean most of the participants were ranked in top 300? Yes. Can you join it? If my strength checks out, I will be allowed. Felix answered. Felix understood that the platform gave the players the option to choose to participate in any game they wanted in this list. Even if the players in it were ranked in top 100 while the interested party was in the bottom of the barrel. The only requirement was to pass a short test that ensured that the player's strength was worthy to join the game. After all, most of the Empyrean games were group-based, and it wouldn't be fair if one of the teams had a low-ranked player compared to the others. Naturally, there were benefits for players to strive to fight in higher ranks. Will you join it? Asna wondered. That's what I am thinking about. Felix answered. Felix understood that if he passed the test and joined the game, he would receive a multiplier from the very start. This meant that if his team won, he would have a much higher chance to emerge as the MVP of the game because of the additional multiplier. However, making such a giant jump in rank wasn't the same as skipping diamond games and fighting in Radiant games. There was absolutely no comparison since the 300 players and above were the true old monsters. From top 400 and below, most of the players were born in 100,000 years or below, unlike those monsters. Some of them were even alive at the early centuries of the platform's foundation. Some of them were kings and queens of entire races. So, it was big a decision and Felix had to make sure that he was ready mentally to fight against them. He was confident in his strength to make a name for himself against them, but he understood that his battle experience was simply incomparable to them. The perfect game for my rank is 5 months later. Felix shook his head. I am not waiting that long for a single game. If I don't make quick moves, I might not end up collecting 10,000 Z points in my entire lifetime. Queen, lock my name in the first game. Felix requested the moment he made his decision. Do you give me permission to use your training data for the test? Queen requested. Yes. Felix agreed at once, knowing that this would save him the troubles of going through the test. As he expected, in a few moments, Queen AI informed, your strength has passed mark. Congratulations, you have permission to join the game. Thanks. Felix smiled as he saw his name added to the list of players. It was written that the limit of players in this game was merely 10. So far, only 6 players registered for it, Felix included. Only God and Queen AI knew the other monsters, who would be either allies with Felix or his enemies. 1060 Outsourcing a War. While Felix was checking his maddening earning list, he had no clue that the Darken faction were discussing his demise. Something has to be done to stop that brat. Wendigo frowned as he eyed his partners in crime, sitting next to him in a semi-dark living room. He has already reached Empyrean rank. Saurus said with an irritated tone, we have only 6 champions from our descendants in that rank. The moment he wins or gods forbid, kills them, we won't be able to lift our heads in front of those Asgardian assholes. Felix's latest victory managed to trigger warning bells in the Darken faction's minds. Ever since Felix was introduced, they always had the assumption that their champions could defeat him in due time. Yet, here they were, at the end of the platform with merely 6 champions left. Felix hadn't lost a single game, don't even mention one against their champions. What else can be done? Mananangel shared calmly, we can't assassinate him or send a subordinate to do it for us. Lord Cows must have planted his wisp of consciousness within him, making it easy to get found out. If it wasn't for fearing to irk Lord Cows, the Darken faction would have already made a move against Felix one way or another. They weren't afraid of the Asgardian faction even a little. As for maintaining face in the council, they already lost too much of it in every dealing they had with Felix. They understood that they would never hear the end of it if their champions were all defeated by the hands of a single champion. Nothing was worse than that. We can't hire anyone since it will track back to us eventually. Saurus added. We need something big and chaotic that is unrelated to us. Wendigo's shadowy eyes turned colder as he suggested, when that brat gets caught in it and dies, no one will point fingers at us. Are you suggesting outsourcing a war or something? Mananangel raised an eyebrow in confusion. Why not? Wendigo disclosed, we can easily influence another race to start a war with the humans. In the process, they could slay that brat. Sounds good in paper, but which race is easily influenced but also powerful enough to threaten that little monster? Saurus frowned, knowing that Felix wasn't easy to kill in the games. Don't even mention in real life, where he had an army of void creatures as well as a servant that can help him enter and exit Void Realm. There is a race that checks all our boxes and can even hunt down that brat inside the Void Realm. Wendigo smiled coldly. Immediately after hearing so, Mananangel and Saurus figured out what race he was talking about. When they thought about it for a few moments, they realized that he was right in his assessment. We already know many of the higher-ups of that race who wouldn't dare say no to us. Saurus laughed. Let's set a meeting. Wendigo narrowed his eyes, we have to get rid of that brat before he grew too big to be killed by such means. 5 minutes later, the Darken faction's members were seen sitting in 3 thrones inside a spacious hall that was dreadfully empty and quiet. In front of them stood 4 unique individuals, who kept looking at each other and the 3 primogenitors with wary eyes. For me to get called with those bastards, my identity was compromised, but how? Sage Arthur thought to himself with an anxious expression. In the open, he was the current king of the Sage race and one of the top 10 rulers in the SG Alliance, but in reality, he was a void imitator, who rose into powers within the Sage race after great struggles. Nothing mattered to him more than his real identity remaining hidden. That's why he wanted Felix dead when he first saw his void army and the wide exposure he was giving to the void race. However, his worries died out eventually when he realized that Felix wasn't an imitator but an actual human due to his connection to Lord Kaus. That's why he never made a move or pushed the other unique void creatures to do it. You don't need to be too wary. Wendigo remarked calmly, we have no intentions of exposing your identities. We never dared to make such assumption, my lords. Einir bowed respectfully while unlocking his void eye in the center of his forehead. If Felix or any member of the Elvish royal family saw him, they would most definitely lose their sh*t, especially Baron, his twin brother. Based on his yellow-colored void eye, he was clearly a Jinn void creature in control of the laws of greed. Although he wasn't an imitator, he had an uncanny level of disguise that could easily even fool primogenitors. In the case of imitators, they were capable of copying exactly everything from their targets, even their unique soul and cultivation systems. This spoke volumes about the wickedness and dreadfulness of the laws of envy. The laws of greed were a bit different from that. The jinns were given the powers to fulfill a wish of their targets in returns of receiving a wish of similar limitation. The wish limitation was based on their target's level of greed as well, the jinn's own limitation imposed on him from birth. That's why, jinns were like invisible void ghosts and sought the greediest individuals in the universe to fulfill their wish and get rewarded by their own powers of greed laws. The only difference was that the target gets hunted down by the universe to restore balance based on the level of his wish. In other words, the target suffered from horrible misfortune each day until the moment he gets killed eventually. As for the jinn, he didn't suffer from the same fate as he was protected by the laws of greed. In the case of the real Einir, it wasn't known what he wished for, but the fake one clearly wished to become him. This gave him everything that Einir possessed, from his personality to his runic familiarity and more. In another note, no wonder Felix never managed to win over Einir compared to the rest of the royal family. Queen Alfreda had a solid reasoning to hate Felix for eternity, but for Einir? He should have fallen to Felix's saintly-like persona just like his brother. It turned out, only true evil see evil. We have called you today to make a request. Manananggal smiled gently. Anything that the lords wished. A breathtaking green-haired beauty smiled charmingly as she eyed the three primogenitors. She resembled Mistress Candace greatly, like their bewitching beauty was artificial and reached its limitation. Based on her pink void eye, she was obviously a void succubus. They even called this sl*t, Miriam. This really must be a big request. Sage Arthur knitted his eyebrows as he glanced at Miriam. Sage Arthur knew that when it came to influence and authority within the SG Alliance, she would be counted as second. She spent unfathomable number of years to infiltrate herself within 8 of the top 15 most authoritative races. She even had reach within his own race, as she had turned many key figures into her sex slaves. Just like imitators, it was almost impossible to find out about her puppeteer control, since she could invade her target's dreams from the void realm. Compared to her, Candace was still a mere playful child. When the paragon of sins created those unique void creatures, they weren't on equal levels at all. Some possessed a higher control over their sin laws while the others couldn't even be mentioned in the same breath. No wonder Candace sought to increase her control over the laws of lust by sticking up with Nimmo. 1061 Outsourcing a war. LL. We have grown a bit bored with the balanced status of the universe. We want you to start wars and break this balance. Saurus stated causally, like he wasn't making a request that could cause an eruption of a universal war. Before the shocking request could register in Einir, Miriam, and Sage Arthur's minds, a 5-meter demonized creature smiled coldly as he replied with a gruff tone, I am in. This was the oldest and strongest annihilation fiend in the universe. He was so old, a few ancient history books mentioned him as the most evil demon to surface in the universe. Unlike other annihilation fiends, he had hundreds of destroyed civilizations and races under his belt. Fortunately for the current populace, he went into retirement just before the SG Alliance era emerged. That's the right response we are looking for. Saurus clapped twice in approval. Wait, wait, wait. Sage Arthur gulped a mouthful in fear. I can't be part of this. the other lords will massacre us when they realized that we are up to trouble for their descendants. You don't have to worry about that. Wendigo smiled, we have an agreement to never interfere in matters related to the current era. So, just feel free to go all out and cause as much mess as possible. As long as their descendants weren't completely wiped out, not a single primogenitor will step up to stop the wars. Haha. I have a feeling that they would enjoy this change of scenery. Saurus chuckled, knowing that most of his peers were bored and seeking new entertainments every day. There was nothing more entertaining for those beings than a universal war that involved most races. Those crazy demons. They really want to see the universe burn so bad. Sage Arthur felt chills course on his spine at the notion that primogenitors wouldn't stop the chaos. He knew that the main reason most of the unique creatures went underground was because of their fear of the primogenitors acting up when they target their races. After all, the chaos would ruin their games and main source of entertainment, but only now did Sage Arthur realize that they had been overthinking things. This was bad for him since he enjoyed his current life. Unlike other unique void creatures, who still believed in their creator's request of causing as much chaos as possible, he completely threw that at the back of his mind. Who could blame him? He already reached the pinnacle of authority with the SG Alliance and even had an entire race under his feet. He was living the best life there is, and he would be stupid to do anything to ruin it. Unfortunately, his peers didn't share the same sentiment as him. Well, I have been quite bored as well. Miriam giggled as she said, I don't mind making my puppets play with each other. I have collected quite a lot, and it's time to lower their numbers, so I can get some new toys. Miriam didn't care in the slightest about her sex slaves, since void succubus were limited in the number of sex slaves they possessed, she felt that it was time to replace a couple of them. Can I be left out of this? Einir spoke with a static unfamiliar tone, my authority is still too low in the 9 elvish realms, I doubt I can be much of a help to the war's effort. That's where you are mistaken. Saurus smiled, we called you specifically because you have a much bigger role. Einir raised an eyebrow in surprise. We want you to keep a close eye on that kid, landlord. Manangle shared, we believe that he is still in the Furlund, correct? I haven't seen him in a while, but I believe he is still around when Selfie isn't throwing a tantrum. Einir replied before asking, why do you want me to keep an eye on him? Do you want me to assassinate him? Assassinate him? Don't overestimate yourself. Wendigo narrowed his eyes, we want you to befriend him and stay on his side all the time, have you guys forgotten that he can control void creatures? All of this would be meaningless if the Darkin faction gave the impression that their main target from the wars was Felix. They knew that Felix was bound to rub horns with the void race if they targeted his galaxy. Since he would be one of the greatest hurdles due to his void creature's control, they would do everything to get rid of him. In other words, if Felix died in that manner, Lord Cows wouldn't hold it against them, even if he found out that the entire war had started because of the Darkin faction. After all, they could easily negate any blame on them by simply confessing that they wanted to shake things up in the universe. If Felix died in the process? That's his own fault for sticking his head in the war. I doubt that's going to work. Einir rubbed his eyelids in frustration, he has been making advances on me for years and I have kept pushing him off, he will be suspicious of me if I suddenly decided to become his free. We don't care. Wendigo eyed him coldly, make it happen somehow if you still want to keep your head. I am screwed. Sage Arthur cried out loud in his mind after hearing his threat. If even Einir was treated like this, there was absolutely no way he would slip out of this war when he had the most influence in the void race. He understood that it wasn't that hard to get rid of him even if he decided to hide somewhere. Being an enemy of a primogenitor was truly unwise and much more dangerous than starting a war against the entire alliance. Arthur will be the leader and Miriam is the vice leader. Mananangle glanced at scary demonic fiend and ordered, the Ruiner will be the commander of the void armies. The Ruiner nodded his head with a pleased smile, for a void creature to be born of the sin of pride, there was no way he would accept to be beneath either Arthur or Miriam. If his pride wasn't appeased like this, he would rather let himself get killed by the primogenitors than accept being under his peers. We only have 3 conditions for this war. Manananggal extended 3 fingers and spoke. 1. We want this war to happen in less than a decade. So, you have an entire decade to start recruiting the rest of the void race under your banner. 2nd, you guys know that we have a bit of a mild irritation to the human race, so, give them a special treatment. Manananggal smiled frigidly. Lastly, don't get F***ing caught in your preparation. Any questions? How much of a special treatment you want us to give the humans? Miriam asked with a playful smile. The 3 Darkin faction looked at each other for a moment before answering simultaneously with a bone-chilling tone, make them go extinct. 1062 making the best of their situation. In a short while, Arthur and the rest were excused from the meeting. Since they knew that a decade was a short period to prepare for such a large-scaled war, they decided to meet right away. So, what's your first order, leader? Miriam emphasized the term leader with a playful tone, knowing that Arthur was a bit of a coward. I dare you to order me. The ruiner narrowed his eyes dangerously at Arthur, making him flinch a little. Although he was the leader, he understood that he had no powers over the ruiner. He didn't dare make him obey forcefully, knowing that their strength was absolutely incomparable. Imitators' unique law of envy allowed them to choose any path they wanted to walk on. In Arthur's case, he committed to the sage race, in other words, he was extremely proficient in making scrolls, but that's it. His strength was dog shit compared to Miriam, the ruiner, and even Einir. I am not here to order anyone. Arthur sighed in frustration. We were all thrown into this mess abruptly, and I am still doubtful if any of this is real. If you want to avoid hiding in the void realm for eternity, you better start believing. Einir commentated composedly. I know, Sci. Sage Arthur understood that if he decided to betray the Darkin faction and escape from his duties, he could easily do so. The Void Realm was his ally and even the primogenitors weren't capable of remaining in it for a prolonged period of time. He could even copy another identity, making it extremely difficult for the Darkin faction to fish him out. However, if he did so, he could kiss goodbye to his life as one of the 10 rulers. Can I please have a couple of minutes? Arthur requested as he sat on the ground in a meditation position. He placed his 4 blue hands on his knees and closed them into fists with his eyes closed shut. The negatives of participating in this war are clear. I might lose my life, I might lose my position, even if I win the war, there isn't much to gain. The Darkin faction did promise them with immense riches if they won the war or at least managed to cause mass extinction of the human race. But Sage Arthur understood that he had already reached the limit of progress with this identity. Unless he wanted to start all over with a new copy that has much better potential, no number of riches could excite him. The positives depends on how heavily I invested in this war. Arthur knitted his eyebrows thoughtfully. If I went all out and caused as much mayhem as possible, I can take advantage of the situation to weaken those above me in the pyramid. In addition, my race's scrolls are more efficient in wars and this will cause our sails to explode. If we aimed our weapons at the dwarves, witches, and the high elves, my race can easily earn the highest amount of SG points. It should be enough to raise our rank for the next cycle to top 5. Right now, the sage race was ranked as the 10th. Arthur knew that if no drastic measures were taken, there was absolutely no way they would be able to raise their rank any higher than that. After all, scrolls might be useful, but they weren't as needed as potions or artifacts. In addition, their price was too high for a single-time use. If there was one thing that Arthur always desired was to raise his race rank to top 5, he never dreamed of surpassing the metal race, the hive race or the dragon race. Those 3 races had their claws affixed as the top 3 in the alliance and not even a universal war could threaten their positions. But for the rest? Arthur knew that it was still a fair game. If this war is happening either ways, it's better that I lead it, so I can profit the most out of it. Arthur smiled coldly. As long as the humans are dead, I doubt those demons will care how the war goes. After weighing the positives and the negatives, Arthur came to the decision that half-assing this war was going to bite him in the ass hard. If so, he might as well take it as seriously as possible and make the best out of the outcome. Please reach out to your most trusted contacts and be as discreet as possible. Arthur snapped his eyes open and requested while eyeing his partners in crime. Why do we need them to be trustworthy? The ruiner sneered, if any one of them dared to reject the war calling, we will make them regret the day they were born as void creatures. Miriam and Einir nodded in approval. In their eyes, no one in the void race had the right to reject joining the war when even them were pulled in it. If they still refused to join it, they could always use the primogenitor's names as threats. I know, but it's still too early to announce the war to everyone. Arthur warned, you know that we have a soloist mentality, who knows if one of our contacts has already sold out to the enemy like that SL*T Candace. Telling them about the war now will merely backfire on us. It was quite normal that Arthur would know about Candace since she was spotted many times with Felix. He wasn't surprised that she bowed her head to Felix. He was confident that she was originally Lord Cow's subordinate. As for Nimmo, he was still a mystery to him. He believed that he was some sort of pet created by Lord Cow's. The only way to truly see Nimmo's terror was to be near him. Luckily for Einir, Felix was uncomfortable by the thought of allowing Nimmo to free roam in the palace or near the royal family. So, they had never met each other before. For the next few years, we need to lie low and focus on taking control over of the wrathful creators, gelatinous cubes, and the world eaters. Miriam mentioned. I agree. Arthur nodded, the wrathful creators will be amassing our void armies while the other two could be used as spear points to the armies. Those three unique void creatures were the only ones with low intelligence and mere slaves to their own sins. For the wrathful creators, they keep absorbing void energy and giving birth to hundreds of void creatures each minute non-stop akin to industrial machines. The void creatures were wired to follow the closest source of life to them the moment they leave the void realm. So, no intelligence was required in the process. As for the other two, both of them were feared throughout the entire universe by all races. That's because the moment one of them targeted a planet, there was absolutely no way to stop them. The only option was to migrate to another planet as fast as possible before they arrive. How are we going to get control of them exactly? Einir frowned, we can't even control the low-born void creatures, don't even mention them. Excuse my bad phrasing. Miriam smiled charmingly, what I meant is to pool them in the void realm and guide them towards our targets when the day comes. But how can we get them in the void realm? Einir asked again, I doubt we can create big enough void rifts to fit them inside. It should be impossible if we do it alone, but if we work together. Miriam poked his forehead cutely, anything is possible. Einir raised his eyebrows in surprise at her answer. It reminded him that the void race was finally going to group up together for one cause. For each sin, there was 100 unique void creature, even if their strengths varied. All of them possessed the basic ability of opening void rifts. In other words, if most of them worked together to manifest one humongous void rift in front of gelatinous cubes, and the world eaters, it wouldn't be an impossible task to guide them inside the void realm. I have a strong feeling that we might own the universe if only 80% of us decided to work together in this war. Einir smiled wickedly as he thought to himself, if that B*TCH selfie and the rest of my cousins died somehow in this war, I will be the only heir left for the 9 elvish thrones. Essing up to that D-head for the sake of this future doesn't sound so bad after all. Even though such a considerable responsibility was dropped on their shoulders, both Arthur and Einir found ways to make the best of it. As for the Ruiner and Miriam, they were merely doing it for the sake of entertainment and watching the universe burn. Let's begin the real preparation, shall we? 1063 The Seed of Life. On the other side of the universe, Felix could be seen concentrating on a new recipe for a rank 5 potion. He still hadn't left the Witch Empire since Lady Sphinx was still conducting experiments on his copy to see if one of the Kraken's hearts can be replaced. This isn't right. Lady Sphinx mewed as she glanced at Felix's wide-open chest. If one looked closely, they could spot a red heart attached near the lung. It was different from the rest of the Kraken's hearts. I have tried everything, and it's still getting rejected by his internal system. Lady Sphinx walked around the surgery table while being deep in her thoughts. Did I make a mistake in my first judgment? Are those hearts unreplaceable? Lady Sphinx started to doubt her first theory that all the Kraken's hearts could be replaced. She had tried almost everything and yet, the high elf heart never beat even once. Maybe the heart I picked is that of a low quality. Lady Sphinx questioned herself, but, which heart can be greater than it and be harvestable? Lady Sphinx knew that if the quality was the issue, then the situation was graver than ever. That's because the high elf heart in her possession belonged to one of the ancient first high elves. Because of her incredible curiosity, Lady Sphinx always had to own body parts from new emerging races in the universe. So, the moment the high elves race was born in the universe, she grabbed one for herself like they were products in a shelf. Was it immoral? Most definitely. Did she care? Not even a little. This heart should be surpassed by the likes of selfie only. If it doesn't work because of its quality, then this experiment is doomed from the get-go. Lady Sphinx rubbed her eyelids in exhaustion. I need a second opinion. Even the great Lady Sphinx knew when to seek help the moment she reached an unbreakable wall. Naturally, she wasn't going to ask for an opinion from the rest of the tenants. Why? Call. I call as well. Bunch of unreadable bastards, I fold. Thor must be bluffing, look at his idiotic smirk. Don't fall for it, he must be faking it. If she asked these bunch of fools, they might even cause her to walk a few steps back in her experiment. Hearts implants, very interesting, so that's the secret of your boy's freakish strength. Lady Yggdrasil commentated as she took a sip from a teacup while sitting under a tree's shade with Lady Sphinx. There was no one better to ask for advice than Lady Yggdrasil since she was also hoping for the same end result. In addition, she was just as brilliant as Lady Sphinx. The runic codex wasn't an easy process to translate and required an unfathomable level of intelligence. I assumed that it shouldn't be difficult to replace one of his hearts with an ancient high elf's heart. But, it keeps getting rejected by his body. I believe it must be the quality, but I am not too sure. Lady Sphinx brought up her problem after giving her a summarized version of Felix's unique situation. Quality? Well, it does make some sense. Lady Yggdrasil nodded, all of your boys' hearts are on a supernatural level. Only those on the same level can be accepted by his body. Felix's human heart shouldn't really be considered as good as an ancient high elf heart, however, that's before he merged with 5 primogenitors' bloodlines permanently. Sure, it was just a little of each bloodline, but it was still more than enough to surpass a high elf's heart. There was no need to mention his other hearts, even the dormant Kraken's hearts are priceless treasures that couldn't be replaced by a mere mortal's heart. I came asking if you possess a heart that won't be rejected. Lady Sphinx mentioned, if there isn't any, helpful thoughts are welcome too. I believe you already know that at this day and age, only Selpha can be compared to what you possess. Lady Yggdrasil shook her head. The current generations are simply incomparable to the first elves both genetically and in runic familiarity. Whose fault is that? Lady Sphinx chuckled. It's not my problem. Mortals like them are forced to evolve based on their environment. Lady Yggdrasil took a sip of her tea casually. Evolution works in a rational and clear fashion. When ancient high elves were first born, they possessed the necessary strength to survive the cruel universe. They could be even considered possessing the same strength as the present royal dragons. This was quite a big deal. However, ever since Lady Yggdrasil had taken them under her wing and taught them about runes and how to harness its powers, their strength started regressing while their intelligence progressed. After a long period of time, the high elves' strength was reduced to the bare minimum for their race. Though, their enhanced intelligence helped them learn and master many runic spells that changed their lives for the better. Unfortunately, the runic familiarity depended heavily on bloodline and luck. This meant that some elves could be born without a good strength and unlucky runic familiarity that forced them to try much harder than their peers to understand the same spells. At the same time, monsters like Selpha could be born with an uncanny runic familiarity, enabling her to learn even the hardest and most complex spells. In conclusion, Lady Yggdrasil had a massive influence on how elves had become. Was it a good influence or not? The answer would be varied from an elf to another based on how gifted he was born. Tell me something, does it really need to be a heart for it to work? Lady Yggdrasil abruptly asked after being reminded of one of her oldest experiments. I am not really too sure. Lady Sphinx replied truthfully, I have always been using hearts since they are the second most important organ in the body. Naturally, the first being the brain, but since that couldn't touch at all, this left the hearts to work with as they had the second most important influence on the body as a whole. I am not talking about organs. Lady Yggdrasil mentioned calmly, do you remember what I was doing in my experiments on other races to help them obtain runic familiarity? The moment she heard so, Lady Sphinx raised her eyebrows in surprise. Don't tell me you are suggesting using one of your seeds. She knew that Lady Yggdrasil had spent a fair amount of time to create the perfect method to help out other races obtain runic familiarity. The runic seed was her final product. In fact, it was the main reason that helped her create her ultimate ability, the Seed of Life. This ability allowed Lady Yggdrasil to create seeds and implant wisps of consciousness in them. She could plant them in any place she desired, and they would start absorbing energy and grow to towering heights just like her. The most shocking and insane thing about this ability was the fact that Lady Yggdrasil's consciousness could grow, in addition to possessing runic codex written on it. In other words, she could have as many perfect clones of herself as she desired. However, Lady Yggdrasil wasn't interested in creating a forest of herself, she had a different use of the Seed of Life. She modified it a bit to make it possible to plant it inside other races' bodies. She did so, hoping that the seed would grow and spread its branches throughout their internal system. Since those branches had the complete original runic codex written on them, naturally, the owners would also be bestowed with perfect understanding and manipulation of runes. In a sense, it was like Felix being bestowed perfect elemental manipulation. The only difference was that the Lady Yggdrasil wouldn't lose her own when doing this. Unfortunately, as much as the theory made sense, the execution went horribly wrong. Why not? Lady Yggdrasil disclosed, my experiments have failed since my seeds were too overbearing for adaptive mortals, taking complete control over their bodies. If I used them on races like dragons, they get completely rejected because of their rigid structure. Your boy isn't like anything I have ever seen. He is the perfect mix of both sides. Lady Yggdrasil smiled, I see hope in this experiment than just using high elves' hearts. Upon hearing so, Lady Sphinx remained quiet as she thought about the feasibility of her idea. As much as her idea sounded too perfect, Lady Sphinx was still hesitant about agreeing at once. That's because Lady Yggdrasil's experiments' results were really too alarming even for her. Lady Sphinx couldn't forget the memory videos of those subjects. One of the subjects was a human since they were considered to be one of the most adaptive races in the universe. Unfortunately, a few moments after the seed was planted in his body, he was turned into a tree completely. The seed literally took ownership of his body before he could even scream in pain at the process. Although Lady Sphinx had her worries, at the same time, she agreed with Lady Yggdrasil's assessment. Felix wasn't like any other human. I am not totally against the idea, but I have to be certain that it will work without side effects before even thinking of suggesting the idea to Felix. Lady Sphinx answered. That's only natural. I will send you one of the seeds. Lady Yggdrasil chuckled, I have created too much, and they are just collecting dust in my garden. Then, give me your best one. Lady Sphinx narrowed her eyes, if we are doing this, then let's do it right. 1064 A new mutation. After spending a few more hours discussing the details of the new experiment, Lady Sphinx excused herself. As for the runic seed, it was already on the way towards the Witch Empire. Unbeknownst to the current development, Felix continued focusing his potion concoction, training, as well as his integration. He was currently at 80%, and he intended to push to 99% before his next Empyrean game, knowing that the Kraken's peak ability would be of a great help. 2 weeks later. Felix, come to my lab at once. Oh, on my way. Felix immediately dropped his elemental training and went towards Lady Sphinx's lab, assuming that she had finished with her experiments on the High Elf's heart. Take a seat. Felix sat next to Lady Sphinx and kept eyeing her with an eager look. There was a change in plans. The High Elf heart wasn't a viable option. Lady Sphinx shared, so, I chose a different path. Before Felix could comment, Lady Sphinx beamed a solid container that was filled with soil. She opened it up and reached inside, pulling an almond-shaped green seed. It was as big as an adult's thumb. Felix didn't need to be told that this seed was special, as he could feel an overwhelming aura emitting from it like it belonged to a supreme entity. Why do I feel Lady Yggdrasil's aura from it? Thor questioned as he eyed the seed. That's because it is hers. Lady Sphinx took her time to explain everything about the seed, from its origin to its utilities and reason for mentioning it. After she was done speaking, Felix couldn't help but raise his eyebrows in surprise. I never thought Lady Yggdrasil was this capable. Felix couldn't even fathom how was it possible for Lady Yggdrasil to create such a seed that had the complete runic codex written on it. The fact that this seed could be used by others and bestow them the perfect runic manipulation was just phenomenal. Why didn't she give them to other primogenitors? Asna titled her head in confusion. I believe none of them would say no to having runic codex added to their powers. We have thought about it, and in the end, we deemed it to be meaningless and quite frankly useless. Lady Sphinx answered. She is right. Thor supported. Primogenitors can't use any other element besides theirs. So, why bother putting a foreign object inside their bodies just to receive another method of utilizing the same abilities? It was like owning a master key that unlocks all doors and still greeting for a rusty key that unlocks them as well, but much worse. When she thought about it like this, it did make sense. Primogenitors might believe that Lady Yggdrasil was peaceful and wouldn't harm them, but still, they wouldn't trust her completely to put her seed within their bodies, especially when it was going to add anything beneficial to their already stagnated development. On the other hand, Felix had affinities to tens of elements. Obtaining runic codex would help him bypass the primogenitor's dilemma and could start learning time spells, space spells, gravity spells, etc. It all depended on his own talent in understanding the runes. How about the elves? I believe that Selpha could really make the best out of this seed. I believe that high elves have quite adaptive bodies. Felix asked. Lady Yggdrasil has created this seed to help other races without runic familiarity obtain it. So, she wasn't really interested in bestowing them to elves. Lady Sphinx added, still, she did try it and ended up failing as well. Is it because of their weak bodies? Asna guessed. No, their bodies were fine. Lady Sphinx replied, their case is a bit unique, as what caused the seed to fail the integration was their natural runes on their DNA. As long as an elf possessed runes in his DNA, it creates a considerable conflict with the runic codex. I see, the conditions for someone to pull off this seed is really too strict. Felix frowned, I am starting to doubt if this will work. If it wasn't going to work, I wouldn't have called you. Lady Sphinx made a gesture with her head at the table, now get undressed, so we can start. Right now. Felix murmured, I haven't prepared my mind. There is no need. Lady Sphinx informed, you will be unconscious either ways. Knowing that Lady Sphinx didn't like repeating herself, Felix swiftly got undressed and laid on the table. May I know how will this work exactly? Felix coughed, will I have real wooden branches inside my body? Of course not, Lady Yggdrasil has done an impressive job modifying the seed to grow based on the bodies it is used on. In your case, the branches will be as soft as blood tissues and will spread throughout your entire body. Lady Sphinx answered while wearing gloves, you can expect them to merge with your nervous system, bones, and even connect with your bloodstream. I see, will they be visible like veins? Felix asked again as he watched Lady Sphinx's assistant inject him with anesthetic drug. You will find out when you wake up. That was the last thing that Felix heard before losing his consciousness. Open him up. 5 hours later. Felix started to mumble in his sleep while turning around in the bed. However, the moment he did so, he was assaulted by a wave of pain coming from at the sides of his forehead. This forced him to wake up from his peaceful slumber. Why do I feel like something is protruding from my forehead? Felix mumbled with a muddled expression. You will know when you look in a mirror. Asna giggled. Without many thoughts, Felix displayed a holographic mirror and glanced at his muddled face. However, the instant he noticed 2 long twisted wooden antlers protruding from his head, he snapped out of it instantly. They resembled adult deer antler greatly as they had some branches on the side as well. Though, they weren't as big as the real deal. What are those? Felix cried out loud as he touched the wooden antlers with a dreadful look. They weren't the only change he went through as his entire body had visible pistachio green veins coursing on his skin akin to rivers drawn on a map. No need to shout. Lady Sphinx emerged out of nowhere and clarified calmly, they are an expected mutation. Though, you should feel delighted to have them since they have an important practical use. I am all ears. Felix quietened down the moment he heard that the antlers weren't for decoration. Felix would always love useful mutations, no matter how they looked. As long as you have them, you will never be required to use wands to cast spells like elves. Lady Sphinx smiled, they are made out of Lady Yggdrasil's sacred wood and have the runic codex written on them. So, you can consider them to be the best wands in the entire universe. For real. My precious antlers. He kept caressing them with a foolish wide smile, never been happier to have horns before. Who could blame him? Felix knew that wands played a considerable role in elves' magic system. Although all the wands were made out of Lady Yggdrasil sacred wood, there were tiers to them based on what area of the world tree they were cut from. The closer to the roots, the better. It might seem simple to own a sacred wand due to how massive the world tree was, but you couldn't be more wrong. Elves never cut trees from their own planets, don't even mention daring to cut parts of Lady Yggdrasil's body. In other words, they had to wait until Lady Yggdrasil's branches or twigs fall on their own and then harvest them. This happened every decade whenever the season of autumn arrives for Lady Yggdrasil, but that's a whole different story on its own. Even when they harvest them and turn them into new wands, they still require Lady Yggdrasil to activate the runic codex within them. This adds even more time since Lady Yggdrasil do this at her own comfort, it might even take centuries, and she wouldn't bother touching those wands, causing a shortage in the market. With those antlers, I will never have to worry about buying wands in my life. Felix smiled. 1065 A peculiar strong connection. Now tell me, how do you feel? Lady Sphinx asked while scanning Felix's body. A bit fatigued. Felix answered while standing up and carefully checking himself. The surgery went much smoother than your previous ones. Lady Sphinx shared, it seems like the seed have truly found its rightful home as the balanced state of your body made it possible to grow at a normal pace instead of overtaking everything. That's good to hear. Felix smiled. Congratulations kiddo, you can now start learning runes and create any kind of spell you desire. Thor stated. Even though you aren't as limited as the elves due to your varied affinities, but I still suggest that you choose 1 or 2 elements to focus on. Lady Sphinx advised. I know. Felix said with a serious tone, I was planning to focus on 2 rare elements that I have absolutely no chance of learning from bloodlines. Well, when it comes to runic rare elements, you don't choose them, they choose you. Lady Sphinx had to break his hopes before they grew too big for his own good. What do you mean? Lady Yggdrasil will explain everything about runes better than me. Lady Sphinx said, get dressed, we will be paying her a visit soon. All right. Felix could only bury his inquiries for now and prepare for the visit. In the royal garden. I can't believe it actually worked, how fascinating. Lady Yggdrasil commented with a pleased expression as she walked around Felix while touching his antlers. I was also surprised by how smooth my experiments went. Lady Sphinx remarked. Don't forget to send me a recording of it. Lady Yggdrasil requested while scanning Felix's new internal system. She could see that the seed had already opened up while having tens of green branches reaching out to the bigger organs. Those same branches had thousands of thin twigs connecting with the rest. It was unique and made Felix's already peculiar internal system even weirder. Well, a deal is a deal. Lady Yggdrasil snapped her finger and manifested a holographic milky white root. It was shimmering with light and kept emitting an incredible pressure that forced Felix to take a few steps back. World Tree First Root. Felix mewed with a stunned look. This is a portion of it. Lady Yggdrasil smiled, I will give it to you when you return to Furlund. Thank you, Elder. Felix bowed his head in gratitude immediately. Throughout the entire transaction, he felt like he had lost nothing. In fact, he could be said to have won 3 great things without much effort. The ability to harness runes. The World Tree First Root. Last but not least, Lady Yggdrasil's personal teaching of runes. How could he not be grateful? Sit down, my child. Lady Yggdrasil patted the ground next to her. After Felix sat down, she manifested a holographic screen and said, runes are an entire new world to you. So, I will be teaching you the general understanding of runes and send you to Selpha to teach you the basics. Come again. Asna immediately sat straight after hearing Selpha's name being brought up. Even Felix was taken back as he expected that Lady Yggdrasil would handle his teaching from A to Z. Unfortunately, Lady Yggdrasil wasn't planning to explain her position. Honestly, it was apparent as there was a one way she used this opportunity to help her daughter spend more time with Felix. Felix wasn't ungrateful enough to complain about any of this. First, let's check how good is your runic familiarity. Lady Yggdrasil placed her wooden hand on top of Felix's head and closed her eyes. A split second later, Felix's green veins started to brighten up while showing peculiar letters and sentences written on them. Felix lifted his hand and zoomed in on a sentence that was written on the tip of his finger. It appeared like this. It's really different from the Universal Codex. Felix wasn't too surprised by the runic language since he was used to seeing it when elves cast their spells or written on scrolls and such. Compared to the Universal Codex, the runic and divine codices were quite known throughout the entire universe. Were they understood? That's a whole different story. This is quite surprising. Lady Yggdrasil abruptly glanced at Felix's eyes deeply and wondered, how can you have such a strong connection to space and time runes? It's even stronger than Selpha. For real. Felix dropped his interest on the runes instantly after hearing so. You also have a quite strong connection to poison, gemstone, and lightning runes. Lady Yggdrasil said, but that makes sense since you have perfect manipulations to them, but both space and time? I have never seen this before. How strong is the connection exactly? Well, to put it into perspective, the moment you master the basics, you will be able to learn time/space spells and even create new ones in mere years of effort. Lady Yggdrasil shared, that's a level of talent that surpasses even Selpha's. This is really too weird. Are all humans hidden monsters like you? Lady Yggdrasil mewed to herself, should I adopt one for myself and give my seed experiment another chance? Felix, do you think it's because of our rebirth? Asna guessed, knowing that Felix was a unique case. It must be. Felix agreed, nothing else makes sense. Felix wasn't that arrogant to believe that he was born with a talent that surpasses Selpha in runes. He knew that everything had a cause and a result in this universe. The only thing that could explain this was Felix's rebirth, since his soul must have been affected heavily during their rebirth. If they knew that the soul/time guardian was responsible over their rebirth, it would have made even more sense. Keep this to yourselves, Lady Sphinx ordered with a stern tone. All right. Felix already never had thoughts of bringing this matter before Lady Yggdrasil. He had no issues with telling her about his other secrets, but his rebirth? He refused to share this with anyone. In fact, he was quite lucky that Hormungandr, Lady Sphinx, and the rest of his tenants were on his side. So, even though they saw the memories of his previous life and what happened, they didn't act weird about it. With their infinite knowledge about the secrets of the universe, they knew that rebirths were phenomenal, but they had seen and heard much more peculiar occurrences than it during their lifetime. Still, this didn't mean that they thought about announcing it to their peers. So, they kept Lady Yggdrasil in the dark about this. If you think about adopting someone, I can recommend you one. Felix decided to change the subject by taking advantage of Lady Yggdrasil's misunderstanding. Is he a little monster like you? Not exactly. Felix chuckled after Olivia's cute image emerged in his mind. She is more like a little angel. However, she is already using your bloodline, and if you permitted her, she can push it to 99% and unlock your ultimate ability, Seed of Life. I have a strong belief that planting a runic seed in her will work if she possessed the original ability. Felix always sought chances to help his friends find new ways to push past their limitations. Noah had already received his opportunity and was growing at a crazy pace under Fenrir's tutorage. Now, another opportunity presented itself for Olivia. He would be foolish to miss it when he had nothing to lose by giving it a shot. Firstly, it is bad manners to use other people's property without consent. Lady Yggdrasil scolded while pulling Felix's ear, resembling a mother disciplining her child. I am so sorry about that. Felix apologized sincerely, knowing that he was indeed in the wrong for utilizing Lady Yggdrasil's bloodline without receiving her permission. At least, you are sensible to not use it all the way. Lady Yggdrasil let go of his ear and said, Tell me more about your friend later, I will be the judge of her character and worthiness. For now, open your mind and listen well, your first lesson about runes starts now. Felix wasn't completely ignorant about runes, but he still opened his ears and focused on Lady Yggdrasil's explanation. I believe that your masters have already explained to you the 3 celestial languages and their believed importance in shaping up the universe. Yes. This should make it easier for you to understand what that meant. Lady Yggdrasil waved her hand in front of Felix, causing a river of green particles to emerge before him. Nature elemental particles. Felix commentated as he eyed the river. Now, what do you see? Lady Yggdrasil asked as she snapped her fingers. Felix's pupils enlarged in surprise at the sight of the same elemental particles turning into green runic letters. It was like they merged with the nearest particles to make those letters. This is what runic elementalists sees compared to normal elementalists like you. Lady Yggdrasil disclosed calmly. This is fascinating. Felix commentated as he scanned the runic letters, feeling quite fascinated by the new sight. He was used to seeing the elemental particles separated or stacked against each other in a chaotic manner. This wasn't the first time he heard about this, but it was definitely the first time he saw it happening in front of him. Seeing always had more impact than just hearing. Lady Yggdrasil snapped her fingers again and the same runic letters were turned into a similar-looking symbols. The Divine Codex. Felix instantly guessed the letters' origin as he was used to seeing them written on his artifacts futharks. Yes. Lady Yggdrasil separated the particles river into 3 portions. One portion showed the chaotic nature of the particles while the other 2 portions had the particles shaped up into the 2 codices. You see, runic elementalists, divine elementalists, and normal elementalists all use elemental particles as their weapon. The energy is the same, but the means of utilization are different. Lady Yggdrasil pushed the chaotic river forward and clarified, you possess multiple manipulations. This allows you to have complete manipulation over chaotic particles as long you have the correspondent affinity. Because you are utilizing the universal language, which considered a step above the other two, you don't require any assistance. Assistance? Yes, assistance. Lady Yggdrasil nodded and pushed the runic particles to the front. For the runic elementalists, they requires runes to deliver their orders to those particles, so they can shape up to the abilities that they desire. The same applies to the Divine Codex, though, there is a bit of difference between them, but I won't divulge into them. Felix understood that she was referring to the fact that the Divine Codex allowed more details to the spells while the runes were rigid in that department, but were more powerful and could be used in the air. Let me show you an example. Lady Yggdrasil pointed her finger at the runic river and murmured with a peculiar sounding tone, "Sea of Lilies." The moment she finished, the river of runes started to rearrange themselves to create the same spoken sentence. It was written as such. Before Felix could marvel at the uniqueness of the situation, the green runic sentence was turned into a yellow sea of lilies flowers around him. I have slowed the process by 100 times, so you can see exactly what happens on the source. I understand. Felix knew that the runic spells were cast much faster than this. If they were cast by Lady Yggdrasil, they should be at least 1,000 times faster. I am sorry to interject, but I have to add something. Lady Sphinx informed, the process that you have just seen was unique to only Lady Yggdrasil. For you and the elves, it's more complex than this. How so? Felix asked. I'm not too sure about you at the moment, but it's impossible for the elves to create runic spells or even connect with runes without wands. Lady Sphinx mentioned. She is correct, wands play a considerable role in your ability to control the runes. Lady Yggdrasil continued on, it allows you to establish connection with the runes of your own element to create or learn spells. Only when you master them, will you be capable of using those spells through channeling your elemental energy within the wand. The wand is responsible for converting the elemental energy into your desired spells. When the process ends, an elemental hex will emerge followed by your requested spell. Ah, now it makes sense. Felix nodded in understanding. With his cognitive reasoning, it wasn't hard for him to get the full picture of how the runic system works, or what the elves call it, magic system. In much simpler terms, the elves started by attempting to connect with the runic particles in the same manner that normal elementalists do with the chaotic particles. The only difference was that they required a wand to facilitate the process as well as strong runic familiarity to help them connect much quicker. When they connect with the correspondent runic particles around them, they begin to manipulate them to shape up into a sentence that would become a spell. They have to practice the same spell over and over again to the point the sentence gets structured subconsciously in their minds. Only then could they use their wands to cast the mastered spell. Naturally, the more complex a spell, the more time would take to master it. Elements such as space, time, life, death, etc., have the most complex spells ever, which would require an unfathomable level of runic familiarity to even connect with them. Don't even mention learning plus mastering them. That's why Selph's talent was just incomparable in this day and age. Even though you have a tremendous runic familiarity to space and time element, I suggest that you start learning spells from a less complex element. Lady Yggdrasil advised, naturally, don't pick the elements that you already possess their manipulations. I wasn't planning to. Felix nodded in agreement, I will pick something else. Though, how can I know my own runic familiarity? You have to learn the language first. Lady Yggdrasil addressed, when you do, the runes will speak to you on their own. Okay. Felix didn't fully understand that point, but he felt that it would make sense when he learned the language first. I will convince Selpha to teach you the language. Lady Yggdrasil mentioned, she is one of the few ones with the greatest understanding of it. Much appreciated. Felix knew that runic language wasn't like any other language he knew before. He couldn't just learn the linguistics of it and proclaim himself to have mastered it. He recognized that the majority of elves merely understood tiny parts of it, as each letter had hundreds of meaning to it. Hell, even Lady Yggdrasil was still deciphering some of the more complex and hidden meaning. In other words, picking up the language was merely the beginning of the struggle. Take this with you, it's the full version of the runic codex. Lady Yggdrasil beamed a thick ancient-looking book and handed it to Felix. Thank you. Felix bowed his head and accepted the book. He knew that other elves weren't in possession of this book. In fact, the only thing they owned was a book that explained the linguistics of the runes, helping them learn the language. But the true codex? No one knew about its existence but the supreme beings. A couple of hours later. Did Mom really tell the truth? Selphie asked with a look filled with disbelief as she walked around Felix. From time to time, she poked his antlers to check if they were real and even smelled his skin after picking up the unique scent of her mother. Stop sniffing me, it's real. Felix pushed Selphie's face away and sat on the bed with a vexed look. But, you, runes, human? How? Even Selphie couldn't help but be left baffled. It was an expected response as not a single race managed to pick up runes besides elves, talisms, and sages. If this was her reaction, one could only predict how Queen Alfreda's face would become at the notion that Felix had shoved himself within their magic system as well. How much did your mother tell you? She said that you have obtained runic familiarity and that I should teach you the language as well as the basics. That's all. Yep, she told me that you will explain the rest. I see. Knowing that Selphie was a close friend and also his future teacher, Felix didn't feel like holding on his secret about the seed against her. So, to facilitate the teaching process, he clarified as much as he could to give her the bigger picture while also keeping some details related to his other secrets in the low. So that's what happened, as expected of Mother and Lady Sphinx. When they combine their intelligence, anything is possible. Selphie commentated with eyes gleaming brilliantly akin to a child tasting sweets for the first time. Felix assumed that she was admiring her mother and his master, but in reality, she just finally realized that she was going to be hanging out with Felix a lot more now. Nothing was more exciting than this. When are you returning to Furlund? Selphie said with a strict tone, as your teacher, you have to be near me in the real world since I can't help you establish a sincere connection with runes in the UVR. I understand, teacher. Felix chuckled, I will depart tomorrow. There was no point in spending time in the Witch Empire anymore after his 2 successful surgeries. You better not give her any weird thoughts. Asna remarked with an annoyed tone. She wasn't a fan of Selphie one bit, especially, when she was clearly still attempting to steal Felix from her even though he made it clear multiple times that he had her and wasn't interested in another relationship. She might be friendly and gentle, but in Asna's eyes, she was nothing more than a clingy groupie. She can have all the weird thoughts she wants. Felix shrugged his shoulders, I have already clarified it for her. Have you heard? Baron asked as he dined while sitting with his twin brother Einir. What? Einir glanced at him calmly. Apparently, Felix has returned an hour ago and spent all of his time inside the practice room with Selphie. Baron wondered, what do you think they are doing there? Einir thoroughly ignored Baron's inquiries the instant he heard that Felix had finally returned. Ever since his first meeting with his peers, he was growing antsy about his mission. The rest of his partners were already making noticeable progress in recruitment and overall preparation for the war. Meanwhile, he had yet to even meet with Felix, don't even mention attempting to heal their relationship. If I want this to succeed, I need to be more friendly with those royal pests. Einir narrowed his eyes, they will help me approach that bastard more naturally. Einir knew that Felix was a suspicious individual, in addition, he understood that he could never break his character even when he was alone. That SL*T Candace is really making this more difficult than it should be. Einir cursed in his mind at the notion that Candace might be spying on him right now. The only way to see her in the Void Realm was by using his Void Eye, but he wasn't dumb enough to seek death like that. Brother, I think I am ready to accept that human. Einir remarked. Hey? Are you being serious? Baron stopped eating at once and asked with a curious tone, what changed? I realized that I was being too paranoid for no reason. Einir smiled, if even the Queen, Mother Tree, and you guys are allowing him to live amidst us, it only means that he isn't a bad person. Exactly what I was telling you. Baron smiled, there is no way Mother Tree will invite an evil person to our palace and even allow him to come and leave as he pleased. I don't know how to say this, but, I think that it's already too late for me to befriend him. Einir smiled bitterly, he must hate me after all the crap I gave him when he was just trying to be nice to me. Hate is a strong word, brother. Baron promised with a serious tone, you don't have to worry. I will help you befriend him, and I am confident that Felix won't hold a grudge against you, he is that nice. I do hope so. Einir remarked coldly in his mind, I really do hope so. While Einir was scheming to smoothen his relationship with Felix, he was learning the basic spells of sand element with Selpha's help. During his journey towards Furlund, Felix spent it learning runes linguistics from Lady Sphinx inside his consciousness space. This helped him save more time when he met with Selphie as they jumped right away to the basics of spell casting. I am not a sand runic spell caster, but I will try my best to help you master at least the easiest spells. Selphie mentioned as she sat in front of Felix inside a humongous spacious hall, it was made completely out of unrefined white wood and white vines. This was the practice hall for the royal family, Selphie had reserved it for 8 hours, making it impossible for the rest of her family to enter or peer inside. I will try my best to keep up. Felix nodded in understanding. As you know, spells are ranked as lesser, greater, advanced, and lastly omnipotent spells. Selphie manifested a holographic runic sentence and a short video displaying the sand spell being used before adding, the first lesser sand spell that every elf learns in the Great Magic Academy is Sand Blasts. Felix focused on the video and saw an elf shooting sand blasts from a golden hex at the tip of his wand. Naturally, before doing so, he said the runic sentence to force the elemental energy to transform into his desired spell. Wanna give it a try? Selphie asked. Since she didn't have sand runic familiarity, she could only work with what Felix was doing and help him fix his mistakes. Obviously, Felix had picked sand element since he had the highest runic familiarity with it right after his poison, lightning, and gemstone elements. He realized that he also had a reasonable runic familiarity to void element, without needing to guess. His runic familiarity was affected heavily by his bloodline choices and the elements he interacted the most in his journey. Since void was just as complex as time/space elements, he had no intentions of focusing on it anytime soon. Felix took a deep breath and closed his eyes shut while sitting in a comfortable position. Selphie looked at him silently, knowing that he was attempting to establish connection with the sand runes. The sand elemental energy might not be as visible, but it was spread around Felix to help him facilitate the connection faster. Seconds went by and then minutes, before long, 5 minutes went by. Usually, the first time takes from an hour to a couple of hours depending on the level of the person's runic familiarity and the complexity of the spell. Selphie thought to herself, it should take Felix 20 minutes. Selphie was forced to swallow the rest of her sentence at the sight of runic scriptures glowing on Felix's antlers. Soon, a golden hexagon manifested at the center of his antlers, causing the sand elemental energy around him to start shaping up into golden spheres. They all gathered near Felix's palms, like they were asking him to fire them, so they could turn into sand blasts. But Felix didn't do so, he opened his eyes slowly, causing the sand spheres to break apart into light particles. Next, the golden hex disappeared and followed by his antlers dimming down. 5 minutes? That's too slow. Felix mewed with a dissatisfied tone after glancing at his bracelet. What do you mean by slow? Selphie exclaimed, if my cousins heard you, they will skin you alive. Am I wrong? Felix frowned. You have no idea. Selpha swiftly clarified for him that even the most talented elf in their magic academy took half an hour to establish connection and finalize his spell. I see, I guess my training in external manipulations have helped me get accustomed to dealing with elemental particles. Although the method of connection was different, Felix was still dealing with elemental particles. Whether they were chaotic particles or runic particles, concentration still played a massive role. In other words, his starting point was a few grades higher than other newbie spellcasters. By the way, how long did it take you? Felix wondered in intrigue. Me. Selpha started avoiding Felix's eyes, feeling a bit uncomfortable with answering. Are you worried about lowering my confidence? Felix chuckled, just say it, I can handle even worse. Are you positive? Just out with it, Alria. 10 seconds. Felix's expression stiffened immediately at her ludicrous response. 10 seconds? It didn't cross in his mind that could be even possible. Hell, he spent almost half a century focusing purely on his external manipulations, and it still took him a minute or two before establishing connection with the chaotic particles. That's real talent for you. Carbuncle remarked with a faint chuckle. 10 seconds in her first time, she must be establishing connection with runic particles almost instantaneously now. Fenrir added, what a gifted young thing. If you had her monstrous talent, half a century should have been enough to help you go past 5 kilometers in your external manipulation range. Thor added salt to Felix's wounds. Felix? Felix? Are you all right? Selphie asked worriedly, waving her hand in front of Felix's face without any response. I am fine, I was just startled a bit. Felix coughed to hide his embarrassment. He wasn't even given a few moments to feel good about his achievement before getting humbled. The worst part, he asked for it. I believe that you could have established connection even faster if you picked the element with your highest runic familiarity. That's quite true. Although he had a good runic familiarity with sand, it wasn't even close to his main elements. Unfortunately, he already had their manipulations, and it would be useless to learn their runic spells too. Try it again. Selpha said while standing up, your assignment for this 8-hour session is to master sand blasts. I think it will take longer than THA. I believe in you. Selpha showed him a charming smile filled with encouragement, you are Felix after all. If you have this much faith in me, it will be wrong to disappoint you. Felix assured. If anyone heard that Felix planned to master his first spell in 8 hours, they wouldn't hesitate to laugh at him. The first spell might have a lesser complexity, but most elves consider it to be one of the hardest to master simply due to being their first. When it came to runic system, experience played a significant role. But when it came to Felix, repetition and grinding one thing for hours had already become ingrained in his soul. So, for the next 7 hours, Felix did nothing but repeat the same for using Sand Blast spell over and over again. With each hour gone by, he reduced the connection time by a few seconds. By the time 7 hours went by, he was able to connect to the runes and activate this spell in the blink of an eye. 0.1 Activation Sequence. Selpha smiled happily, you have officially mastered Sand Blasts. 0.1 is still too slow though. Felix wiped his sweaty forehead with a dissatisfied look, if I dared to use it against my current opponents, they will have my head before it leaves my hands. Well, 0.1 second is the criteria in the academy. Selpha shared, you can always have your own mastering criteria. What's yours? Felix asked curiously, your time spells always emerge faster than a thought. My mom imposed a 0.01 second criteria. Selpha sighed, that's why it takes me a lot of time to master just one time spell while I could have mastered a dozen. Quality is always better than quantity. Felix agreed with Lady Yggdrasil, I know that you dislike fighting, but if you were in this field for as long as I am, you will realize that you have made the smart decision. Felix understood that Selpha wasn't appreciating her strength or even realizing her full terror in battles, to cast time spells at 0.01 second would automatically make her take the lead in every fight. After all, time tramps over almost every other element. You will understand my pain when you start grinding for that criteria. Selpha giggled, knowing that Felix had no idea how difficult it was going to be. I'm not planning to find out soon. Felix shrugged his shoulders before requesting, give me another lesser spell to master. Felix might be dissatisfied with 0.1 second on his sand blasts, but he wasn't planning on wasting days or even months of his life to push towards 0.01 criteria in such a useless spell. He would do so only for truly important spells in his life. In his current stage, not a single lesser spell was worth it. I will give you 20 more lesser spells to learn. If you mastered them in less than a week, we will move on to greater spells. Selphie informed. I like the sound of that. Kaka kaka. Too bad, our time has finished. Selphie sighed after hearing a bird's screech resound in the entire practice hall. We don't need to practice here. Felix stood up as he suggested, we can continue in more reclusive place in the planet, so no one will bother us. Felix had no intentions of stopping after 8 hours, he was just warming up. But, aren't you worried about getting found out? Why would I? Felix raised an eyebrow in confusion. I have no intentions of hiding the fact that I can learn spells. If someone doesn't like it, that's his own problem. Felix had already gone through the same crap when he first learned how to concoct potions. Sure, he might not want to announce that he could learn spells, but he never planned on actively hiding it. Big Sis will really have a stroke if she hears about this. Possibly. Felix chuckled while calling for Candace. She opened a void rift and emerged before them with Nimmo sitting on top of her head, ruining her hair. Eeeeeeee. Nimmo jumped on Felix's embrace immediately and started rubbing against him. Let's move through the void realm. Felix asked Selphie, are you alright with that? Will I be alright? Selphie was somewhat excited to experience the void realm for the first time, but she was also nervous by the same thought. After all, she had no void immunity, and it was known fact that nothing survives in the void realm. You will be fine. Felix promised, Candace will take care of you. Candace remained quiet as she transformed into an aircraft for them to enter. It was quite unusual for her to not make sexual remarks, making Felix a bit relieved. Unbeknownst to him, Candace was a hardcore supporter of Asna's camp, making her dislike Selphie just as much. After stepping into the void realm for a mere split second, Candace kicked both Felix and Selphie near an empty cave that was a few kilometers deep under a mountain. Then, she returned to the void realm without saying a word, leaving Nimmo to roam freely in the cave. That was so fast. I barely got to see anything. Selphie exclaimed as she looked around her. There is nothing much to see anyway. Felix replied, it's just pure darkness, making you confused whether you have your eyes opened or not. Still, it was a unique experience I never thought I will have. Selphie thanked Felix. You will grow bored with it soon. Now, let's continue where we left. Without further ado, Selphie displayed the second spell to Felix and watched him practice it. Naturally, the connection period wasn't as long as the first time. Still, it took him 2 minutes. The only way to reduce it was by rigorous repetition. Because of his built-up experience, Felix managed to master this one in less than 5 hours. Then, he moved to the next one, which he finished in less than 4 hours. After this one, the speed of progress dialed down a bit as he kept hovering between 3 and 4 hours for each lesser spell. Maybe, you should take a break? You have been going at it for more than 24 hours straight. Selphie suggested while rubbing her eyes with a sleepy expression. Not yet. Felix responded, you can sleep, there is no need to force yourself to stay up for me. I am fine. Selphie replied while yawning. Felix beamed a comfortable bed and placed noise-cancelling devices around it. Sleep. I am no. You better sleep, or I am taking you back home." This did the trick as Selfie instantly tacked herself in the bed with a wronged expression. Felix ignored her cute look and continued his training. There is no time to waste. Felix talked to himself, I need to master, lesser, greater, advanced, and even omnipotent sand spells before considering challenging time/space/void spells. Felix understood that when he finally goes for time/space/void spells, he would need to start actually deciphering the spells from the runic codex. Right now, he was merely learning in already discovered spells, which slashed the duration immensely. Thor and the others didn't say anything about this, knowing that focusing purely on runes at the moment was the smartest thing. His elemental manipulations were already staggered as he was left with only advanced abilities and increase his external range, both take a lot of time to produce results. It was much better to focus on runes right now to receive a major bump in his arsenal. 3 days later. I can't believe you learned all 20 spells in 72 hours. Selfie remarked with a look filled with admiration, your work ethics are much better than mine. Still not enough, give me some greater spells now, Felix spoke like an addict as he drank a recovery potion that relieved his mental fatigue. Not so fast, mister. Selfie shook her head, I need to test you on those spells first, they might be lesser complexity, but you will realize that activating them amidst a stressful battle is 10 times more difficult. You know better. Felix didn't want to waste time arguing with her, it was best to do her test as fast as possible to prove that he was ready for the next stage. So, what's the test? Me. Selfie smiled charmingly as she pointed at herself. Hey! You will be fighting me with only those spells. You can forget about learning greater spells if you don't defeat me. Wait a second. How is this fair? Felix protested. Don't worry, I won't bully you. Selfie giggled as she clarified, I will be using only 20 lesser spells from my nature element. Obviously, everything else will be equalized by Queen AI. The moment he heard so, Felix knew that he would be getting bullied for the next upcoming days. Go take a break, we will start the test tomorrow morning. Fine. This time, Felix knew that he needed the break to get back to his peak form. The first thing that Felix did was return Selfie to her room in the palace before deciding to walk back to his room. He had been sitting far too long in that cave. How do I defeat Selfie with those limitations? He thought to himself. Felix knew that the limitations were actually massive on his part compared to Selfie. That's because he was constantly engaged in battles in his peak form. Now, he had to make a drastic shift by reducing his strength, speed, reaction speed, and even ban his elemental manipulations and other weapons. He would be literally fighting against his own trained instincts while also needing to be focused to use the learned spells. Selfie didn't have such a problem since she rarely partook in battles. Let's see how it goes. Felix could only drop the speculations for now and get some well-needed sleep. Alas, the moment he reached his room, he found a guard standing in front of it. What's the matter? I apologize for the disturbance, Sir Felix, but you have been called by the Queen to her throne chamber. The guard informed. I see, I will be there shortly. Felix nodded in understanding and continued his journey towards the throne chamber. It looks like the Queen is curious about my antlers. Felix chuckled, knowing that Queen Alfreda was bound to feel something strange about his current appearance, especially when it was related to nature. In the throne chamber. Greeting Queen. Felix bowed respectfully the moment he stood before Queen Alfreda, whether she disliked him or not, he would still show her the appropriate respect for being one of the top 10 strongest individuals in the alliance. Queen Alfreda nodded silently and started scanning Felix from top to bottom. Mother Tree wouldn't have permitted him to use her bloodline, right? Queen Alfreda thought after picking up Lady Yggdrasil's unique scent from within him as well. If it wasn't for the antlers, she would have been more confident in her assumption. I heard news that you went out with Selfie for more than 3 days. Queen Alfreda narrowed her eyes at Felix and said, I want to avoid intervening in Selfie's life, but you should understand that she is the heir to the 9 elvish realms. If such scandalous news went public, we will never the end of it. So, be mindful of the time you spend with her alone if you truly cared for her. Queen Alfreda was merely using this as an excuse to check on Felix. He wasn't stupid enough to not figure this out, as he knew that elves weren't known for making big deals of such things like humans. Sure, if she was a human princess, the news would be writing all kinds of misleading articles in a heartbeat. Meanwhile, the elves believed in honesty to the point they wouldn't dare write false reports on Selpha to make quick buck. So, to avoid prolonging this conversation more than it needed, Felix agreed with her laughable request and excused himself. Though, he didn't forget to tell her that he wouldn't control Selpha's movements. In other words, if she wanted to hang out with him, he wouldn't be impolite enough to stop her. Queen Alfreda couldn't do anything about this since it was Selpha's problem, not his. After Felix left the throne, Queen Alfreda called calmly, "Alvin, what did you see?" Alvin appeared out of nowhere and shared with a strange look. It was a bit vague and foggy, but I noticed something peculiar within his body. For starters, it looks like he has multiple hearts or something. Alvin shared, his internal system is all wired differently, like he is some bizarre creature. Knowing his master, I am not too surprised that she had run some freakish experiments on him to empower him like that. Queen Alfreda commentated. She also watched Felix's latest game and saw how he managed to survive even after having his entire chest blown out. If it wasn't against the rules to scan internal bodies without consent, everyone would have known about Felix's internal system by now in the UVR. Even the game judges weren't allowed to do so since internal bodies were considered the same as private parts. It wasn't funny in the slightest if everyone was allowed to peer into each other's internal systems like some creeps. However, if someone did it in the real world with his own set of abilities, Queen AI had no say in this. The most peculiar thing was an almond thingy that was connected with a unique network of green veins. Alvin frowned. I sensed nature element emitted from those veins. This caught Queen Alfreda off guard. This is all that stands out. Queen Alfreda waved her hand to excuse him while still deep in thought about the green veins. No matter how much she guessed, she never landed on the real cause. It must be related to Mother Tree. Queen Alfreda stood up with a deep frown, planning to visit Lady Yggdrasil and confront her about the matter instead of wasting her time with guesses. The moment Felix stepped into the palace, she felt like he was leeching his hands into everything that's important to her. Her royal family, Selpha, the life essence fountain, and even Mother Tree was on his side. Even though she wasn't proactively attempting to sabotage him like before, but she was still uncomfortable by the fact a human was running rampant in her home. I hope it's not a big deal. In the royal garden, half an hour later, Queen Alfreda could be seen sitting on the ground with a deadpan expression, appearing like she had just heard the worst news in her entire life. Lady Yggdrasil didn't seem to care too much about her reaction as she sipped tea with her usual kind elderly smile while reading a book. He can harness runes, a human can harness runes like us, this is it. Queen Alfreda looked at the glass ceiling of the royal garden with a defeated expression. She was told almost everything by Lady Yggdrasil, from the fact that Felix could now use runes to self as becoming his personal teacher. If she heard such news at the very start of meeting Felix, she would have honestly gone into a crazy rant, but now? She was honestly a bit numbed by Felix's actions. You better get used to him. Lady Yggdrasil chuckled, he will be staying here for a very long time. Queen Alfreda already figured that for herself, hence, her defeated expression. What else could be done against Felix when he even obtained their runic system? She knew that the news was bound to spread out and create a never-seen chaos before that would put their race in the limelight. Queen Alfreda could only sigh in frustration and return to her throne chamber. She knew that the smartest thing to do was prepare for the chaos that would arise as everyone would start seeking Felix's method to start harnessing the runes as well. When Felix thoroughly ignored them, they would switch their aggro to the royal family. What did I do wrong to have this troublemaker prick settle in my territory? Felix sneezed in his peaceful sleep, having no idea that he had just upset Queen Alfreda yet again. The next morning, Felix and Selphie could be seen standing in opposite areas on a circular white spacious arena. While Selphie had an easygoing chirpy smile, Felix looked like he was going into war for the first time. 3, 2, 1, fight! The instant Queen Ai kicked off the battle, Felix's antlers shimmered brilliantly before a golden hex appeared in the center. When the hex was completed, countless hardened sand arrows emerged from the hex before getting launched rapidly towards Selphie. Whoosh whoosh! Leaves barrier! Selphie waved her wand a bit, causing a green hex to manifest almost instantaneously. It was followed by a spherical barrier made out of toughened leaves. The barrier was created so fast, the arrows had barely crossed half their distance. As expected, she has an even faster casting speed with lesser spells. Felix thought with a stern expression as he watched his sand arrows break into sand particles after landing on her barrier. Let's see how you perform under pressure. Selphie smiled charmingly as she tapped her barrier with her wand. The instant she did so, the barrier broke into thousands of sharp leaves that were hurled in direction of Felix. Shit, I can't evade them in time with my limitations. Knowing that dodging wasn't an option against this shower of sharp leaves, Felix was forced to go on defense. Sand wall! He called out loud as he eyed the approaching leaves. Unfortunately, the nearer they got, the more his instincts screamed at him to move out of the way. This had caused his focus to be split in half. When it came to runes, this was a grave mistake. God damn it! Felix could only curse in irritation as he guarded his face against the leaves' rain. As for the sand wall, he completely gave up on it as he knew that by the time the hex come online, he would already be a walking hedgehog. Are you all right? Selphie asked from a distance as she eyed Felix, who was bleeding from everywhere. Still breathing. Felix spat a bloodied mouthful of saliva and started pulling out the sharp leaves from his body. Alas, he had no idea that Selphie wasn't done yet. I am sorry for this. Selphie covered her eyes and waved her wand one more time. Well, just F***GRE. Boom boom boom. Before Felix could finish his tirade, the leaves blown out into a much smaller sharp fragments. Since most of them were still inside his body, his entire internal system was turned into a mush. Not a single heart managed to survive the blow, killing him instantly. Round 1 goes to Selphie. Queen Ai announced as she revived the annoyed Felix. He wasn't annoyed at Selphie but at himself for going down so easily when his greatest assets were taken away from him. He realized that he stopped being mindful of every small thing when he had gotten so strong. If it was the old Felix, he would have instantly considered that the leaves could be blown. Sure, he might not have done anything to stop it with his limitations, but at least he would have known about it. Are you wondering about how I managed to extract 3 spells from just one? Selphie asked from afar. Isn't it something similar to ability modification that normal elementalists utilize? Felix answered. Kinda of. Selphie clarified, what I used is an advanced technique called derivation. As long as I have the original first hex online, it allows me to change the runic sentence while the spell is still active. This results in the spell's effect being changed. I see. Felix wasn't too amazed by this technique since normal elementalists were capable of doing the same with their abilities much easier and simpler. Based on your expression, I can tell that you aren't too impressed. Selphie said. It's nothing new. That's where you are mistaken. Selphie smiled, sure, normal elementalists can do the same and much easier, but can they do this? Under Felix's stunned eyes, a flower emerged in Selphie's hand before getting turned into a tree in the blink of an eye. She wasn't done yet. She kept changing the form of the spell to something thoroughly different from the original spell with 1 hex online. The hell? How is that possible? This was enough to amaze Felix as he knew that even normal elementalists weren't capable of doing so. Well, to be exact, they could change an ability to another. However, it required them to manually break off the first ability into elemental energy before using it to create a new ability. This would take at least a second or two to pull it off compared to how instantaneous Selfie made it seem. This is the beauty of having runes assisting you in your manipulation. Selfie explained, you guys are free to control chaotic particles as you pleased, but at the same time, it puts a considerable toll on you to do everything manually. Meanwhile, runes helps us automate the process as long as we have mastered both desired spells. Selfie concluded. Obviously, this is only possible for high-rank spellcasters as it took great amount of focus and runic understanding. Does spell complexity play a role as well? More than you can imagine. Selfie smiled wryly, I am barely capable pulling this technique with omnipotent spells from my other elements. As for my time element, I can't do it even with lesser spells. That's tough. Although it wasn't ideal, Felix was still interested to learn the technique since it would add variety to his sand spells in the future. Alright, enough chit-chatting, let's go again. Selfie cancelled her spells and prepared for the second round. Without an ounce of hesitation, Felix kicked off the second round by manifesting two giant hardened sand swords, then, he dashed in Selfie's direction while protecting himself in a set of armor. Two spells at once, you are really improving at a crazy rate. Selfie smiled happily while creating a wide leaf and sitting on it. The leaf started hovering in the air and flew her away from Felix. At the same time, Selfie kept using other nature spells to either catch Felix or harm him. This time, Felix had learned his lesson and focused on every single little detail, allowing him to avoid the emerging vines from the ground and even the flying explosive seeds. They were being fired by a small squad of flowers on top of Selfie's leaf. Slice. Boom. If he couldn't avoid everything, Felix used his giant sand swords to open a path forcefully. Unfortunately, this slowed him down, making him incapable of catching up to Selfie. Are you planning to run forever? Felix remarked in vexation. Yep. Selfie giggled, I am not a fool to get close to you. Selfie knew that Felix had an insane level of battle experience compared to a greenhorn like her. If she ever fought him up close, he would most definitely teach her a lesson with just those two swords. I need to find a way to get near. Felix looked around him for anything to use to his advantage like in the old times. Too bad, the arena was as empty as my wallet. If it's like this, then I will make her come to me. Felix narrowed his eyes as he whiffed a sword swing, causing him to have his arm get caught by a vine. Just like moths drawing to fire, the rest of the vines immediately extended in his direction and caught the rest of his limbs. Naturally, Felix kept struggling against them to not draw any suspicious off him. Use your spells, I have thought you 20, and you barely used 4 by now. Selfie chided as she watched Felix attempting to cut the vines with his sword, but to no avail. It's not easy, damn it. Felix cursed in annoyance while showing her that he was indeed giving it his best. Alas, the golden hexes kept breaking in the middle of their creation. Well, if you don't master them quickly, this test might last months. Selfie halted tens of meters away from Felix while waving her wand at him, manifesting a giant tree with blue chilling leaves. Freeze him to death. Selfie ordered while looking in the other side, knowing that Felix wasn't going to surrender peacefully. Now, there was no way Felix wouldn't take advantage of her behavior. Boom. Giant sand hands emerged from underneath Selfie and smashed her between their palms. The sand wasn't hardened but had a much worse effect. Dehydration. It absorbed the water content of anything it touched, causing the tree and the plants around Selfie to shrivel and die almost instantly. As for Selfie, she wasn't spared from this nasty effect as well as her lustrous skin and hair began to turn drier and drier. With her losing focus like this, the vines holding down Felix went soft, allowing Felix to get freed. The moment Felix was given his freedom back, he tightened his grasp on the swords and charged towards Selfie with ill intentions. Kill her! Asna cheered happily. Whoosh! Without hesitation, he swung his sword inside the sand, splitting it in half. However, before he could feel joyous, Felix glimpsed at his sword and realized that it didn't have a single blood drop. "You are really mean to use such a cursed spell on a girl," Selphie complained from within the sand palms, causing Felix to flinch a bit. Just as he decided to pull away from her, Felix realized that he was surrounded by more than 100 green hexes. "I never thought I will say this, but you deserve to be punished." Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The green hexes all turned bright for a second before countless brown wooden spears were launched from them. They came from every single direction, not giving Felix even a second to think of a way out. "This is cheating." Felix could only shout out his grievance one last time before getting impaled to the ground by hundreds of spears. "It's not cheating, it's a technique called spell multiplication." Selphie walked out of the sand akin to an undead fairy covered completely in dried out leaves and flowers. As for her skin and hair, they were restored back to their original shape after she killed Felix, not allowing him to see her in such a bad state. "This isn't over yet." Felix immediately declared for the third round to start after he got revived. Those 2 losses hadn't set him back at all, but instead made him even more motivated to beat Selphie under her own turf and rules. Alas, being hyped was one thing and achieving his desired goal was another. Felix ended up spending more than a week battling Selphie. In that week, they fought over 300 battles until Felix had literally memorized every single spell, technique, combination, strategy, and tactic utilized by her. Only then was he able to predict every move she was about to do and plan 3-5 steps ahead to defeat her. Naturally, it wouldn't have been possible if he hadn't thoroughly adapted to his 20 spells and made the best of them. Honestly, if Selphie wanted to go all out and give her absolute best, Felix would still take much longer to defeat her. However, she wasn't interested in the slightest in that, as her main goal was always Felix's progress. Now, that she was satisfied with his lesser spells combat mastery, she could finally move on to another lesson. "Do you want to learn some of the techniques I showed you or continue with greater complexity spells?" Selphie asked as she sat next to Felix in the middle of the arena. "Techniques without spells to work with are just useless additions." Felix shook his head. "Let me reach first omnipotent sand spells." "Alright, let's pick up next week." Selphie sighed. "Mom is pressing me mom to train as well." "You better listen if you don't want me to surpass you," Felix said with an easygoing smile. If anyone heard him, they would laugh their asses off at his delusional confidence, but not Selphie. She knew more than anyone else how fanatic Felix gets when it was related to his strength. She could totally imagine a day when Felix's runic mastery would leave her far back if she kept lazing around like this. "I will make sure that never happens," Selphie promised with a stern tone before teleporting away. She realized that if Felix had beaten her even in the single thing that she was proud of, then she would have nothing to offer him anymore. Such a dreadful thought didn't sit well with her obsession. After she was gone, Felix laid on the arena with a thoughtful expression. "After I pick up the World Tree First Root, I will be needing only nether steel from the Dwarven Empire." Naturally, there were more materials required to craft the masterpiece divine weapon, such as Shadow Satin, Frost Lead, and Electric Gold, but Lady Sphinx had already helped him with the rest. "Is it possible to start the forging process while having a single material missing? I can always bring it later on," Felix wondered. "It depends on the weapon, material, and lastly the forger himself," Hormungandr answered. In other words, it was impossible to know unless he asked Cyclope about it. Luckily, Felix was given his number and was permitted to call him if he had any inquiry. "VRRR VRRR. Clug. What's the matter, boy?" Cyclope asked kindly the moment he picked up the call, seeming like a chill uncle talking to his nephew. "Elder, I have already obtained a portion of the World Tree First Root and 20 ancestral dragon scales." Felix got straight to the point, not wanting to waste Cyclope's time. "Even World Tree First Root?" Cyclope raised the only eyebrow he had in surprise. "You are quick. I wonder what you did to convince that stingy tree, I doubt even your wish could have worked. Cyclope always thought that Felix would have gotten stuck on this step since Lady Yggdrasil was pretty protective of her World Tree First root. It meant to her so much, and she refused to give him even a bit when he requested some during the primogenitor's era. It was my master's effort as she helped Lady Yggdrasil finish a long-standing experiment of hers related to runes. Felix answered without involving himself in the picture since he knew that the credit didn't belong to him. If it wasn't for Lady Sphinx coming to the rescue as always, he would have been left stumped. Well, if it's something related to runes, I can see that stingy tree letting go of her treasured roots. Cyclope chuckled for a bit before adding, by the way, you should bring the materials as fast as possible, don't forget that the forgery process would take a century if not more. That's why I called. Felix shared, I am still missing the nether steel. Is it alright to bring them without it for now? No problem, the nether steel will be used to coat the blade of the axe, that's at the very end of the forgery process. Cyclope confirmed. Great, I will be there as fast as I can. Felix's eyes brightened up at the news. You have my address. Cyclope hung up swiftly after. Without delay, Felix logged off and called Selphie, telling her to prolong her training for a month or so as he would be leaving the galaxy for an important task. Selphie could only wish him good luck on his task, knowing that Felix wouldn't miss training unless it was for something significant. After dealing with her, Felix went straight to the royal garden, hoping to pick up the route. However, on his way there, he ended up bumping with Baron, Einir, and the girls. It looked they had just returned from the city as they were wearing clothes for disguise to avoid attracting attention. When was Einir this close to the girls? Felix was left curious by the sight of Einir laughing and joking with Moana, Elnora, and Kerwin. Felix! You have finally separated from Selphie. Elnora remarked with a surprised expression after spotting Felix. Morning guys, it's been a while. Felix smiled charmingly, not picking up on her suggestive jab. Brother Felix, you have really been shunning us on the side lately. Moana pouted, we rarely got to hang out as we used to. Alright, stop bothering him. Baron defended, he is a busy man with serious games to prepare for. Upon hearing so, Felix turned to glance at Einir instinctively, preparing to hear some insults. However, he was left baffled when he saw that Einir still had a polite smile planted on his face. Nothing? Not even a small insult? You want to hang out with us? Elnora asked with a hopeful tone. I am sorry, but let's do that later. Felix rejected her offer with a bitter smile, I have a meeting with Mother Tree right now. I see, I guess you can't miss it. Elnora and the girls sighed in disappointment. Why the hell is he joining them? Felix got creeped out a bit when he saw that Einir showed the same expression. When Baron saw Felix's reaction against his brother, he swiftly mentioned, by the way, my brother has been trying to reach out to you for a while now. Is that so? Einir stepped forth with a remorseful expression and said, I just wanted to apologize to you about my crappy treatment at the start. This really caught Felix off guard, he already proclaimed Einir to be a lost cause. I have realized that I have been too paranoid of something that didn't exist. I might be proud, but I am not that short-sighted to not see my mistakes and fix them. Einir bowed his head deeply and apologized sincerely again, I am really, really sorry, and I hope we can turn a new page. When Felix turned to look at Baron and the girls, he saw that all of them had hopeful and eager looks, like they were anticipating him to forgive him. Felix realized that he had shown them a bit too much of his saintly persona. If he didn't forgive their cousin after he bowed his head and apologized sincerely, he would be seen as someone who holds grudges. Felix didn't want to lose his good image in their heads after he worked his ass to build it, it made his life comfortable and smooth in the royal family. Still, this was Felix. I am sorry, but I can't accept your apology. The moment Einir heard so, he displayed a hint of anger in his eyes before completely extinguishing it. Unfortunately, Felix had picked it up as he was analyzing his face when he said so. Sigh, I knew that it wow. Just as Einir was going to resort to his sob story, Felix interrupted him with a brilliant angelic smile. I can't accept it because there is nothing to apologize for. You had your doubts and worries. They were reasonable as I am still a human. I know that my race doesn't have the best picture out there. So, I am just glad that we can finally put this racial difference behind us, my friend. Felix finished his monologue with his arms wide open, offering a hug to Einir. He had the nicest smile ever, making it hard for anyone to reject his hug. Hug him, you fool, before I do it. Elnora pushed Einir towards Felix, making him get embraced by him. Einir didn't know why, but he felt a great terror set in his heart for a split second the moment Felix's arms connected around him. However, when he saw Felix's gentle foolish smile, he regained his senses and sighed in relief. I am just tripping, I should contact the war room to update them about this good news. What did I tell you, brother? Baron laughed as he patted them both in the back. I knew that Felix will never hold a grudge for something so childish. I will be really upset if you guys thought so. Felix acted annoyed while letting go of Einir. Before the cousins could reply, Felix glanced at the time and remarked with a worried tone, crap, I will be late on Mother Tree. Let's continue this later. He disappeared out of sight immediately, not wanting to spend another second with them. After he got out of their radars, Felix's angelic expression turned demonic almost instantaneously as he requested, Candace, stay close to Einir and tell me anything peculiar about him. Felix had no clue what was Einir's agenda, but he knew that he had one. He would be foolish to give him free rein to prepare against him. On it. Without delay, Candace stopped playing catch with Nimmo in the Void Realm and started following Einir up close. Nimmo caught up to her and started pulling her hair with an upset expression, clearly not too pleased by her ditching his playtime. We will play later. Candace placed Nimmo near her chest and gave him a head rub to appease him. Meanwhile, her eyes never left Einir, scanning every single detail. When Nimmo saw her interest in Einir, he tilted his head in confusion and jumped from her embrace. He went near Einir's face and started sniffing him through the dimensions. The moment he picked a familiar scent, Nimmo's eyes widened up before he started squeaking in excitement and happiness like he had just found a new toy or a friend. However, Candace did not see it like that one bit, as she knew that Nimmo would never react like this to any stranger unless he was from the Void race. Felix, I think we have a problem. Candace spoke while giving Einir a murderous death stare. What's the matter? Felix inquired as he stood in front of the royal garden's glass door. I am fairly certain that Einir is either an imitator or a djinn. Candace informed. Immediately after hearing so, Felix halted his hand that was about to knock on the glass door. He had a solemn look on his face as he asked, how sure are you? Well, Nimmo keeps squawking next to him like a metal detector. Felix didn't doubt her any further after Nimmo was brought up. It's not out of the ordinary for an imitator or a djinn to hide amidst other high-ranked races to seek a better future for themselves. Candace frowned, but, why is he attempting to get friendly with you? My exact thoughts. Felix replied with a stern tone, he must know that I have you around and that I am quite connected with Lord Kaos. The smart thing is to keep me away from him like before. If Felix found out about Einir's identity when he was despising him, he wouldn't have thought much of it. But now that he was getting proactive with him, he felt that there was a much deeper agenda than he thought before. Not a single unique imitator or a djinn would dare to risk having their identities exposed unless they were forced to. Maybe, he figured out about Nimmo's identity somehow and wants to build a relationship with you. Asna guessed. Highly unlikely, but it's a possible scenario. Felix nodded. Any unique void creature wouldn't hesitate to stay beside Nimmo and serve him, knowing that he was the only one capable of enhancing their sins laws. Candace didn't want that to happen since it would mean that her position in the family would be at risk. That's why she showed murderous intent on Einir. My mind tells me it's something else. Felix continued on, he changed his persona after I returned from the Witch Empire. In other words, something must have happened to him in that period. Nimmo wasn't even close to him at that time. That's true. Indeed. What do you reckon it will be? Asna wondered with a curious tone. He definitely doesn't want to be my friend. Felix answered, if his intentions were sincere, he wouldn't have shown such an expression when I rejected his apology. Or he is faking it to get back on the good sides of his cousins. Asna suggested, he might have realized that he is being isolated by the royal family because of you, this will make his life difficult. I think so as well. Felix nodded in agreement before adding, still, everything is mere speculation and the only way to know his true reason is by either catching him lacking or interrogating him. I doubt it will be possible to catch him making a mistake. Candace shook her head, unless he is an idiot, he should know that I might be having my eyes on him at any given moment. Sigh, that's true as well. Felix massaged his wry eyelids, this is getting too bothersome. Just because he found out about Einar's identity, it didn't mean that his mind would automatically go to a universal war, and he was somehow related to it. This meant that unless he found out about the news directly from Einar's mouth, it was almost impossible to predict the war. Should we bite the bullet and catch him? Candace proposed. What are our success odds? Felix asked. If he was an imitator then our odds are mostly 100%. Candace answered, however, if he was a jinn, it might get tricky. How so? Felix understood that imitators' entire strength depend on the copy they took. Einar wasn't even close to his current strength, making him able to take him down alone. Jinn's laws of greed allows them to entice greed out of their targets and act upon them without a second thought. Candace shared, I know that your mental defenses are pretty tough, but they will get broken effortlessly since you humans are one of the greediest races in the universe. Felix knew that she wasn't wrong, most humans were never easily satisfied. They always want more and more even if what they owned was already great enough. Sure, this trait helped humans push forward in almost all fields, but at the same time, it could be their downfalls. The hostile relationship with the dwarves was the perfect example. They were allowed to start crafting artifacts imitations, helping them earn a sizable piece of the artifacts market that was monopolized solely by the dwarves. Yet, instead of holding into that piece, they allowed their greed to take control and start seeking profit instead of the artifacts' quality. This almost ended up causing the entire artifacts market to crash, pissing off the dwarves for eternity. Felix might not be as foolish to be enslaved by his greed, but he understood that he wanted numerous things in life. If Einar decided to bring out and enhance that greed in his heart, God knows what would happen. If he decided to escape, it will be quite easy. Candace added, unlike me, his main body was in a ghost state, making him untargetable. So, he can ditch Einar's body and escape through the void realm if things went south. So, if we went for this, and he was a jinn, we only have one chance to make it right. Pretty much. What about Nimmo? Felix inquired, do you think he can control him like the other void creatures? I honestly don't know. Candace replied while glancing at Nimmo, he has never attempted to control me. So, I don't know if he just can't do it yet, or he simply doesn't feel like it. I see. The only reason Felix managed to catch Candace was because she invaded his mind with her main consciousness. Nimmo had nothing to do with her besides luring her with his similar aura to the paragon of sins. In other words, Nimmo's ability to control unique void creature was never put to test before. I guess we can only test it out on you, sorry about that. Felix said. It's fine, I also want to know. Candace smiled. Let's leave this later. Felix remarked as he knocked on the glass door. He was standing far too long in front of the glass door, and he knew that Lady Yggdrasil could feel his presence. In a short while, Felix exited the royal garden with the world tree first root within his AP bracelet, he honestly was quite surprised by its humongous size as it barely fitted within his largest spatial card. So, are we going to the Dwarven Empire right now, or you will handle that idiot's situation first? Asna asked. Elder Cyclope is first. Felix answered. Felix knew that Einir would be here when he returned, as long as he didn't know that his identity was already exposed, nothing much would change. If so, why rush his situation? Some time later, Felix, Candace, and Nimmo could be seen standing inside the same cave where he trained with Selphie. Are you ready? Felix asked. Yes. Candace nodded. Nimmo, can you order her to sit? Felix spoke with Nimmo as he made gestures with his hands to make his message easily understood. Eeeeeeee. It looked like Nimmo understood him as he titled his head cutely in confusion while squeaking at Candace. He was giving the impression that he understood what Felix wanted, but was confused about his reasoning since this was Candace. Don't worry, just go for it. Felix comforted him. Eeeeeeee. Nimmo stopped hesitating and turned to face Candace with his loving cute face. However, in a split second, his red eyes started shimmering brilliantly as he showed Candace an expression that would forever live rent-free in her mind. Thud. Candace fell on her knees by her own volition, feeling like her existence would be extinguished if she didn't do so. The shocking part? Nimmo didn't even order her yet. All right, that's enough. Felix patted Nimmo in the head to stop him after seeing that Candace was shivering on the ground like a wounded puppy. Eeeeeeee. Nimmo returned to his chirpy self instantly and went to play around in the cave. Are you okay? Felix asked with a concerned tone as he helped Candace stand up. I am fine. Candace replied with a pale complexity, seeming like she was rescued after drowning. What happened there? Asna asked in intrigue. I don't know, but I saw myself as nothing but a tiny particle in front of Lord Nimmo. Candace answered while glancing at Nimmo with a fearful look. She was so shocked by the experience, she started addressing Nimmo as Lord again. All the fun time and bonding she spent with him was wrecked in a single moment. She was awakened to the reality that Nimmo was her god, her creator, her savior, her everything, or at least, the replacement to her previous god. I guess we know our answer about Einir's fate. Felix remarked with a frigid tone. If even Candace became like this when Nimmo got serious with her, there was no need to mention what would happen to a stranger of the Void race. After knowing that Einir's fate was sealed, Felix embarked on his journey towards the Dwarven Empire. Meanwhile, Einir was currently meeting with his partners in the war room, updating them on the good news. It looked like the war room had been tripled in size as many fiends and void succubi were added. As for imitators and jinns, they were quite harder to convince since they had to worry about losing their identities if everything went south. Good job, Einir. Arthur praised with a head nod while sitting next to the head chair in a round marble table. Naturally, the ruiner was taking the head chair as he was considered the pride of the fiends in the void race. In other words, he was the only one capable of making other proud fiends except having him above them a bit. We can now be aware of his movements as well, learn everything about him. Miriam smiled charmingly, make sure to dig specially on his weaknesses. The humans are the key to this war, as long as we get rid of their head spear, they will be nothing but sheep to farm. Arthur added. I will try my best, but you should know that I might not be bringing you any updates for a while. Einir shared with a serious tone, I always feel like that SL*T Candace is breathing down my neck. I must play this as safely as possible to not expose my identity. That's only natural. Be careful on every move you make, your identity is everything. Agreed, we have no need for intel about him this early on preparation. So just focus on cultivating your relationship with him. Everyone in the war room showed Einir support on his mission, making him sigh in relief mentally. Einir knew that his position in the war room depended heavily on his relationship with Felix. If it wasn't for him being in the right position at the right time, he wouldn't have been invited this early to join the war. So, if he wanted to keep his high position and succeed in his goal, he must make his mission always relevant to the efforts of the war. Alas! If only he knew what awaited him after Felix returned to Furlund, he would have tucked his tail between his legs and fled as far as possible. 7 days later. Felix, we are about to pass over the dwarven capital planet, Dozatus. Should I make a short stop or move on? Candace informed as she slowed down her speed. Since we are already here, might as well do a little scouting. Felix replied. All right. Candace made a small turn and increased her speed again. In less than a few minutes, she was already near a dwarf brownish planet that seemed to have not a drop of water on its surface. It was just surmounting brownish mountains chains and dried out fields across the entire planet. Even the clouds were orange and covered the majority of the planet, making it hard to see the surface. Since they were illegally trespassing, Felix wasn't concerned with the custom services near the planet. Even if he wanted to be legal about it and enter with his spaceship, he would end up getting hunted down since humans were banned completely from any area of the Dwarven Galaxy. In fact, if he wasn't offline from network at the moment, he would have already been warned by Queen AI that she would be sharing his location with the Dwarven authorities until he leaves the galaxy. We have less than 2 hours, so let's make it count. Felix said. Candace nodded in understanding and swiftly entered the brown planet. After reaching the surface, she went to the nearest mountain to her and flew underneath it at a moderate speed. In a few moments, a vast mesmerizing city emerged before her own eyes. This was the city of Meldarul, or what everyone else call it, the Sunhold. It was built underneath this rugged mountainous chain, following its exact curves and turns. This made it resemble a long dragon symbol from above. For a city built underground, it was extremely bright as there were thousands of illuminating crystals on the ceiling and near the steel metallic buildings. Its allure was matched by the backdrop of rich, luscious fields which have helped shape the city to what it was today. The resources these fields brought were of great importance since nothing could be grown on the surface of the planet. It looked like those fields were relied on for a long time as they had influenced the architectural designs of the city. The vast majority of buildings were built with an abundance of large windows to mimic the openness of fields. It seemed like many cultures had left their mark not just on business, but also upon the city's identity, as the skyline was riddled with similar metallic modern skyscrapers. Each was more impressive than the next. They might seem modern-like, but they weren't generic in the slightest, as they resembled giant metallic obelisks with pointy head. At the very center, a building stood out of the rest as it occupied at least 5% of the entire city. It was built on a mound, making it seem to be supervising everything and everyone. Unlike the metallic skyscrapers, it was a golden palace with a giant circular disc at the very top. The disc was held by nothing as it kept defying gravity while slowly turning around itself. This disc wasn't for decoration purposes but acted like a sun as it was embedded with billions of illuminating crystals. It was giving off a gentle light to every corner of the city, making it seem alive even underneath a barrel planet. Fortunately for Felix, he was able to see this phenomenal architectural at least once in his lifetime through Candace's consciousness vision sharing. It's really more beautiful in real world. Felix commented with a tone filled with admiration. Should I head straight to the Sun Palace? Candace asked. Yes, we need to gather as much information as possible. Felix nodded. Felix knew that the nether steel was going to be the hardest material to gather if proper ways were used. Unlike the dragons, the dwarves wouldn't even entertain having him around, don't even mention striking a trade deal or something similar. Even if he used all of his wishes to create a false identity, it would barely last a few years. Disguising as different human was nothing like disguising as another race in the eyes of the Alliance, especially if the other race absolutely abhorred you. After entering the palace, the first thing that Felix saw bearded dwarves walking back and forth with dirty clothes and big patches of skin covered in soot. They were mixed in with other clean dwarves carrying giant jars of bears as they laughed thunderously on their way. If one didn't know any better, he would have no way to guess that some of those dwarves were actually part of the royalty. Only dwarves has such a loose hierarchy where even the emperor can hang around with the bottom-ranked forger and still laugh together like old friends. Felix commentated with an envious tone. Dwarves had no such emotions as greed, envy, or jealousy, they all consider themselves to be on equal terms from the moment they were born. This completely removed any sense of superiority they could have on each other. Because of their lack of such sinful desires, they also had no intentions of seeking such an empty sensation. The only thing in their minds was creating the best of the best artifacts. Since the race needed some structure to operate properly, the ranks were based off the grade of artifact a dwarf had forged. The current Emperor Local had obtained his position and authority through forging a legendary artifact. Still, Felix knew that Emperor Local didn't care too much about his authority. In fact, he disliked it as it gave him too many responsibilities, which ate most of his time. For a dwarf to be able to forge a legendary artifact, it only implied that his talent and passion was over the roof. We are really dicks to even antagonize such a passionate and pure-hearted race. Felix sighed as he kept watching the dwarves enter and leave the Sun Palace like it was their home. The Sun Palace was considered to be a public property for everyone. Even other races could pay a visit and tour inside for as long as they pleased. Where to now? Candace asked. Let's search for the treasury. Felix requested, I want to see how the Nethersteel looks like in real life. Of course you do. Asna giggled in amusement. You really think too lowly of me. Felix coughed. We will see. Without questions asked, Candace began searching for the treasury. It wasn't easy in the slightest since the Sun Palace was just too vast with thousands of floors and countless rooms. It was a city on its own. Still, Candace followed the common sense that the royal treasury should be hidden either at the very bottom of the palace or the top, where it was inaccessible for everyone. Just because the palace was public, it didn't mean that everyone could enter any room within it. There were still some boundaries and privacies to be respected. Candace started from the very top of the palace and worked her way below. Wait, this must be the throne chamber. Felix stopped her after arriving at a spacious hall that had a metallic golden chair at very end of it. If it wasn't for the throne, it would have been difficult to figure it out due to all the forgery equipment and materials laying all over the place. Thud. Before Felix could scan the chamber any further, the giant amber gate was pushed wide open by a furious-looking dwarf. Based on his crown, grayed-out thick beard, and contrasting bulking muscles, he was clearly none other than Emperor Local. He was carrying a giant silver hammer on his shoulder and wearing leathery boots. Leave me the hell alone already. I have been handling business for over 4 hours straight. Emperor Local threatened as he patted his hammer, don't make me use this on you. Two dwarves entered behind him with irritated looks while having tens of holograms opened in front of them. Damn you Local, it's not like we want to keep pestering you with this. Just sign the damn papers already, so we can get on with our forgery. They were treating each other so informally, Felix felt like he was watching a fake royal play. For subordinates to address the emperor by his first name and even curse him, this really only happened in the Dwarven Empire. It was quite normal since those two subordinates must have been either part of his family or close to his age. Dwarves might not respect social class status between them, but they did respect seniority. Well, I am not reading them. Emperor Local pulled the holographic papers in his direction and started signing them one by one without even bothering to read the title. Here you go, now scram. The moment he finished, he kicked them out of the throne chamber, and closed the gate behind him, not bothering that they were cursing him out loud. Phew, finally some spare time. Emperor Local's eyes brightened akin to a kid seeing his favorite toy after glancing at his forgery equipment. What is he doing? Felix and the rest of the tenants raised an eyebrow in surprise at the sight of him undressing in middle of the throne chamber. In less than a second, he was already in his underwear alone as he walked towards a turned-on furnace that was emitting a crazy level of heat. Come to daddy and make me feel the heat. Emperor Local smiled widely as he stood before the furnace, allowing himself to get hit by the heat. Then, he blasted a loud native song and started working on a blue piece of metal that was resting on an anvil. I didn't think that he was like this. Felix got a bit ashamed at the notion of spying on a man being himself. Let's get out of here before he removes another thing. Felix rushed Candace, not liking how weird things had gotten. Of course, they made sure to search the throne chamber for any hidden room before leaving. Unfortunately, they kept going lower and lower in the palace, yet they hadn't found anything. Since this was the royal treasury, no one should know about it besides a handful of trusted individuals. So, Felix couldn't resort to anything to help him find it. Minutes went by, then hours. The time limit that Felix had set had been broken. Yet, he still refused to bail before he sees the nether steel. He knew how it looked like, but he had no idea about its quantity or even if it was still there. Isn't the Queen going to send an investigation squad on you? She will, but it won't matter much if I returned online in a few hours and explained it to her. Felix answered. It wasn't like the investigation squad even knew about his location. So, it would take them a considerable time to even find him. By then, he would have already handled it with the Queen. In the worst scenario, he could always use a wish to bail him off. Candace dropped her worries and continued her search. By now, she had already covered more than 100,000 rooms on her way down. It was quite easy when she was more or less like a ghost. 3 hours later, thousands of floors under. I think this is it. Candace remarked softly as she hovered above a circular platinum-colored gate that resembled a bank safe. There were more than hundreds guards of many different strong races in this floor, responsible over the protection of the safe. Step inside. Felix requested. Candace did as she was told and went through the thick safe's door. After her head emerged on the other side, Felix couldn't help but take a deep breath to settle his rising heartbeats. Dear Mother of Treasures! Felix ought to feel agitated as the safe stretched for half the floor and was completely packed with an unfathomable amount of remarkable treasures. All of them were placed neatly on glass containers, which were positioned above giant pillars. The pillars seemed to be stating that no one was worthy to be even on the same level as those treasures. For one of the richest races in the universe, they really have a treasury that backs it up. Lady Sphinx commentated, not bad. When even Lady Sphinx had praised those treasures, the average man would have a heart attack if he ever was placed here. Nether steel. Felix remarked after his eyes caught a giant cube of purplish steel at a distance. It wasn't hard to spot because of its enormous size. It was towering over every other treasure. It's still in the exact same form when Cyclope gave it to them. Felix sighed in relief. Looks like none of them tried to cut too much of it in attempt to forge it. It was quite normal as dwarves worshipped such treasured materials. This made them unable to waste them when they knew that their forgery was still not adequate. Satisfied now? Asna smiled in amusement. Why aren't you leaving yet? SHSSHHS. Felix shushed her down in annoyance and requested from Candace to get a bit closer. Stop being a wuss and just grab it already. Asna rolled her eyes at him. I know you want to do it. I wish to do numerous things, but I don't. Felix didn't deny it, but it also didn't mean that he was comfortable by the thought of stealing other people's belongings. Especially, when the dwarves had already suffered plenty at the hands of humans, it would be really a dickish move on a universal level to steal their most precious treasure. Felix might be an asshole, but he had a clear conscience. Who said anything about stealing? Asna chuckled devilishly, you are just borrowing it for a short while. I agree, you are just borrowing it since you need it even more. The other devil Candace supported Asna, plus, I doubt the dwarves will be using it any time soon. Try never. Lady Sphinx said calmly, the only one capable of using this material is Cyclope. If dwarves wants to forge something with it, they must learn the true divine codex to bring its fullest potential. You already know that dwarves are still stuck at the basics as they can only write the divine codex on Futharks. Hormungandr added. It doesn't help that Cyclope had given up on passing his legacy to them. Thor gave his own input. Upon hearing their opinions, Felix couldn't help but agree with most of their points. He had a huge problem with stealing something that wasn't his, but if he borrowed it and returned it later on when he found another piece, then it was a different thing entirely. The fact that dwarves had this material sitting here for more than 1,000,000 years and would stay here for another 1,000,000 or more made him even more convinced that it wasn't so bad to take it. Wake up! It's still stealing, no matter how much you sugarcoat it. As long as you didn't get their permission, it's stealing. Felix's angelic consciousness appeared on his shoulder, trying to talk some sense to him. Before Felix could agree with that point, Asna's devilish enticing voice resurfaced again. You will be using it to forge a divine weapon, it will be crafted personally by their god and teacher. If you showed it to them and apologized later, I am sure they will weep tears of joy of having their most precious material get used to craft the best weapon in the universe. I think the same. Likewise. It's a sin not to take it and use it for your divine weapon. I am certain that the dwarves will beat you up if they knew that you are hesitating about this. You devils! Felix's angelic consciousness was utterly crashed by Asna and the rest. For everyone else, they had a sane consciousness and another with the bad thoughts, but in the case of Felix, he had an army of tenants in his bad side. Even the cute Nemo was the most evil entity in the universe, who could beat such an influence. I guess you guys are right. Felix mewed as he reached out his hand to the nether steel. As long as I find another piece and return it, they won't be too mad. Right. Yes, yes, yes. Asna nodded with a wide grin on her beautiful pink lips. And so, Felix stole the most precious treasure of the dwarves and placed this tiny note on its place. I will bring you another one in the future, thank you for your understanding. Candace swiftly took off towards Cyclope's address, knowing that their heist wasn't over yet. The note that Felix had left was a temporary countermeasure in case someone entered the treasury and found out about the nether steel's disappearance. We need something of similar appearance to replace the nether steel. This was the real countermeasure to avoid alerting the dwarves. Felix felt that the dwarves rarely visit the royal treasury due to the heavy security on the floor. Even if someone did visit it, there was a big chance that he wouldn't look too deeply on the nether steel and get fooled by a similar copy. After all, who would assume that nether steel would get stolen without raising a single alarm? Fortunately, we are heading towards Elder Cyclope. Felix commentated, he should have what we are looking for. You could have just left a note that involves Cyclope and I doubt they will let out a single fart about any of this. Asna mentioned lazily. It's the most reliable option for sure, but I refuse to involve Elder Cyclope in any of this. Felix shook his head with a solemn look. Asna might not care too much about such details, but Felix refused to disrespect Elder Cyclope like this. After all, how bad would it make him look when dwarves realize that he had returned to get back what he had given them? It was quite shameful. Based on Elder Cyclope's kind and easygoing demeanor, he probably wouldn't care as much. Still, Felix refused to go that far. 1 hour later, Felix exited the Void Realm and continued what remained of the journey on his spaceship after entering Cyclope's territory. Although it was situated within the Dwarven Empire, it wasn't subjected to its laws or rules. This meant that he didn't need about Queen AI sending his coordination to the authorities. As for the investigation squad, he already settled it down with the Queen. As long as he wasn't planning to break his contract's terms, then it was all good in the eyes of the Queen and the Alliance. Are we really heading to the right place? Felix inquired in confusion as he watched a cosmic milky white sun getting closer and closer. His spaceship was merely a couple of million kilometers away from the sun, making it cover his entire field of view, yet, there was no planet or any land in sight. We are in the right path. Lady Sphinx replied calmly, Cyclope has sent you straight to his main forge. If you aren't confident in your spaceship's heat protection, then it's best that you store it. Thor mentioned casually, his main forge is situated on the surface of this star. Felix was left at loose for words. He didn't bother asking before, thinking that he was going to a planet, dimensional pocket, or something with a surface. Yet, not in his wildest dreams did he think that the forge would be positioned on a star's surface. Naturally, since stars had no solid surfaces like planets, moons, and such, the main forge must be hovering extremely close to the photosphere. My spaceship isn't built for any of this. Felix swiftly halted his spaceship and beamed it in his spatial card. Then, he continued his journey from within the void realm. If it wasn't for fearing that his AP bracelets would be melted off, Felix could have flown directly into the sun without a single ounce of worry. After all, he had immunity to fire and heat in general. In a few seconds at best, Candace had gotten so close to the star, nothing but solar flares were seen around them. Fortunately, they were watching from the void realm, which protected their eyes from the intense light. I think I see it, Candace mentioned as she pointed at a tiny black dot suspended beneath an arc-shaped cosmic solar flare. It was at least 10 times the size of Earth. Yet, the tiny black dot was unmoved. The closer they got to it, the bigger it became. When they were merely a few 1,000 kilometers away, it was close to the size of the moon. It was cubic and had countless windows on all of its surfaces, making it resemble a super spaceship. For the material to not get melted off or even have a change of a color, it must have been built by using the salamander metal. Felix remarked with a look filled with astonishment. He understood that the salamander metal was the only known metal to have an opposite reaction to heat. While most metals get melted when exposed to high levels of heat, the salamander metal was capable of absorbing and converting that heat into sustainable natural energy. The more heat it received, the more energy it produced. The best part? There was absolutely no threshold to the level of heat it could be exposed to. For such a special and desirable type of metal, it was almost impossible to find it, making it get ranked on top 5 rarest types of metal. Yet, here it was, a moon-sized forge made completely out of it. He is the metal primogenitor, all right, let's see if he will let us in. Naturally, Felix had to ask for permission before stepping into the forge since it was impolite to arrive unannounced. Some time later. Welcome to the White Star Forge. Cyclope greeted with a kind smile as he towered over Felix. Thank you, Elder. Felix bowed his head politely while glancing around him with a curious expression. There were thousands of silver metallic giant automatons, walking back and forth while carrying all sorts of equipments. Felix knew that they weren't bots operated with AI, as they had the divine codex written across their entire bodies, dictating every single move they make. You caught me cleaning up the forge. Cyclope chuckled. I have never used this forge ever since the primogenitor's era ended, so, everything was left to carry the dust. I can help. Felix proposed, wanting to use his gemstone golems to give a hand. No need. My helpers are enough. Cyclope gestured with his hand while walking away. Follow me. Felix chased after him while continuing to look around him in marvel. The interior of the forge was even more splendid than the outside, as it had unique tinted dark windows that allowed a balanced level of light. The gravity was perfect so as the cooling like they weren't merely a few kilometers away from the sun. After walking for a short while, Cyclope and Felix had arrived at a humongous forging station that made him feel like he had stepped into the land of the gods. A single nail was at least 100 times bigger than him. Even Cyclope looked too small in this area. However, that soon changed as Cyclope started getting bigger and bigger until he made the forge station seem to have a reasonable size. Size manipulation. Felix mewed, realizing that Cyclope also mastered this ultimate ability. The only difference was that other primogenitors mastered it for the sake of battles while he learned it to help him with forging any kind of divine equipment. Come join me up here. Cyclope invited with a faint smile, the view is much better. Without an ounce of hesitation, Felix also used his own size manipulation and pushed himself to match Cyclope's size. Elder, I doubt I can stay like this as long as you. Felix coughed, knowing that his current size couldn't be supported for more than an hour. Oh, you can use the Void Realm then. Cyclope permitted. Much appreciated. Understanding what meant, Felix requested from Candace to open a void rift to fit his arm, then, he pushed it inside the void rift and started absorbing void energy to sustain it. He could have done the same with his neutral conversion technique, but he knew that it was limited in this area unlike the infinite void energy. "Show me what you got," Cyclope said. Felix nodded and handed him a spatial card that had all the requested materials with the exact quantity. You managed to get your hands on nether steel as well?" Cyclope remarked in intrigue. "Didn't you say that you are having problems with getting it?" Cough. "I kinda paid a visit to the Dwarven Empire and borrowed it on the way here," Felix answered sheepishly, knowing that didn't sound too good. "Well, good job." Cyclope nodded casually before moving on. "Now that I have everything, we can finally begin." "That's it," Felix said with a surprised tone, not expecting that Cyclope would be this nonchalant about his blatant robbery to a gift that he had personally given. You still on this?" Cyclope patted him in the head while chuckling. "They weren't going to use it anyway. So don't beat yourself on such a useless matter." Just like the other tenants, Cyclope also wasn't too concerned with the dwarves' reaction. In his mind, keeping such a fantastic material hidden for such a long time was a crime on its own. "All right, wear those for your safety." Cyclope didn't wait for Felix to respond as he shoved giant pair of goggles in his chest. Then, he made an unlocking gesture with his arms while staring directly at an enormous metallic wall. Ka thud. "Dear God, don't tell me, he is planning to expose us directly to the star." Felix felt shivers course on his spine after being hit by a brilliant blinding ray of light when the wall was separated into two halves. Without an ounce of hesitation, Felix removed his bracelets swiftly and threw them inside the void realm. Candace caught them and protected them. Then, he wore the goggles, making him stop squinting at the incoming intense light. Ka thumb. In a few moments, the wall was no longer there, making Felix and Cyclope face directly the hellish surface of the sun. "Oh, I just remembered, can you handle the heat?" Cyclope asked as he scratched his bald head with an embarrassed expression. "More or less." Felix's eyelids twitched, knowing that Cyclope could have easily killed him if he didn't have fire immunity. "Do excuse me, I rarely receive guests here." Cyclope sighed in relief, knowing that he would have been killing not just Felix, but also 3 of his friends. No wonder Kumiho and Siren always tease him because of his clumsiness on anything unrelated to forgery. "Elder, if I may ask, why are we even here?" Felix wondered. "You mean being this near to the sun?" "Yes. How else do you think I will be able to melt nether steel and the rest of these divine materials?" Cyclope smiled. "To forge a divine masterpiece, you need a natural masterpiece to act as the furnace. What's hotter than stars in this universe?"